Joint Select Committee meetings, and even media briefings. Don't forget to click the subscribe button to receive a notification when we are streaming live events. So visit our YouTube channel ParlView to keep current with all our parliamentary happenings.
The Honourable, the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honourable members, Mr. Ganga Singh, MP, member for Chaguanas West, has asked to be excused from the sittings of the House for the period December 6 to 15, 2017. Dr. Rudal Munilal, MP, member for Urupuch East, has asked to be excused from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Papers 1 and 2, the audited financial statements of Invest TT Limited for the financial years ended September 30th, 2015 and 2016. Paper 3, the report of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the progress of the proposals to restructure CLICO, BAT, and CIB for the quarter ended September 30th, 2017. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that papers 1 and 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honourable members, the question is that papers 1 and 2 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honour to lay the following papers. Paper 4, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 5th report of the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises on an inquiry into the administration and operations of Caribbean Airlines Limited. Paper 5, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 6th report of the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises on an inquiry into the borrowing practices of state enterprises, with an emphasis on regulation of borrowing purposes for borrowed funds and sustainability of debt servicing ratios. Paper 6, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to the 8th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial years 2009 to 2015. Papers 7 to 11, the responses to the 4th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. These responses are from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, and the Ministry of Public Administration and Communications. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Works and Transport, I have the honor to lay Paper 12, which is the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Regulations 2017. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Reports from committees. Prime Minister's questions.
The member for Shogunas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the Prime Minister state the recommendations of the Muti investigation into the circumstances surrounding the procurement of the Cabo Star and the Ocean Flower 2, and how this investigation has helped to change the situation?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm sure that it is common knowledge that the Muti report has been made available to the Parliament by way of the Parliament's Joint Select Committee, which was looking into this matter. And that being so, this has been available for a few months. And I would have thought that my colleague would have familiarized himself with the contents of that report. And one of the first things he would have seen, very carefully taken, is that the Muti report was not required to make any recommendations because it was not an all-encompassing inquiry. And therefore, no recommendations were requested and none were made. Secondly, Madam Speaker, the Muti report identified, as requested, the documentation and the facts surrounding the procurement of these two vessels. And what the report would have shown and what the government has gleaned from the report, and the country should glean, is that the procurement process at the port with respect to the acquisition of this vessel, the Cabo Star, involved corrupt practice. As a result of that information contained in that report by documentation and by inference, the government is satisfied that the board of the port was denied pertinent information in a deliberate way so as to facilitate the selection of the Cabo Star, and that the price paid could have been influenced by those circumstances. That is a matter which the government has made public, and I stand by that. Secondly, Madam Speaker, what it has done to treat with the situation is to allow the cabinet, or even the port authority, if that be the case, to treat in a particular way with any recommendation coming from the company Bridgman by way of its selection of an authority. And that is what is happening at the moment, Madam Speaker. So therefore, we contracted with the Cabo Star, I dare say under duress, but duress meaning that pertinent information was hidden from the port. And the same thing with the Ocean Flower, being the same management, we are advised.
Supplemental, Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In view of the statement made by the Honourable Prime Minister that there were corrupt practices Is there or are there any contemplated action against those who may have so been found?
Madam Speaker, I am not in a position to answer that question definitively, but I tell you, I have seen suspensions and dismissals from the management of the port. Some of it are consequential upon these processes, and I do not advise myself in the matters of law, but I do know as a layman that fraud goes to the root of all contracts, and the contract with the Cabo Star, I expect that the public interest would be pursued with respect to that contract, and particularly with the price being paid and the selection of that vessel.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
Based on the report, Honorable Prime Minister, and you indicating that there was no consideration for recommendations, arising out of that, are you as Prime Minister considering any areas for that you will be contemplating other than the issue of the corruption that has been unearthed?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'm not clear on the convoluted question. Could the member clarify, please?
Beside the issue of the corruption, is there any other area that you feel as Prime Minister that you need to deal with based on the report?
Prime Minister.
The report was specific with respect to the procurement, and therefore, since difficulties have been identified, we are focusing on the issue of procurement, particularly since subsequently we've had another failed procurement exercise. And it's against that background that the Cabinet has intervened to ensure that there is a vessel to service Tobago, and that vessel is being sought by a subcommittee of the Cabinet dealing directly with the marketplace.
For Shagona Seas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Is the question number 2. Is the Prime Minister considering the removal of the present board of the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for dereliction of duty in light of the appointment of a Cabinet subcommittee to procure a vessel to service Trinidad and Tobago?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, with limited information available to my colleague, I assume that that would be a reasonable position, but that is not being considered at this time. And let us understand something, Madam Speaker, and I want to say this. It is very easy, usually, to jump on the backs of people who serve in those positions. But let us all understand that those boards are served by volunteers who come from the public sector and serve the public interest. And in the fullness of time, if there's need for the board to be dismissed for wrongdoing, then I would not hesitate. On the other hand, if the information indicates that there are reasonable considerations of that volunteer service, I will be the first to acknowledge that.
Supplemental question, member for Shagona East.
Thank you. Honourable Prime Minister, will you be able to say that as such, given the circumstances, that your government has lost confidence in the current board of the Port Authority?
Madam Speaker, I've said nothing to support that inference, and I do not now say that.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
Do you think it is satisfactory and appropriate for Cabinet to appoint a 4-member committee to look at the procurement of these vessels rather than sending it to the Central Tenders Board, etc., if you do not have the confidence in the port?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, if I didn't think it was satisfactory and appropriate, I wouldn't do it.
Member for Point-a-Pear.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, in light of Trinidad and Tobago being named as one of the 17 tax haven countries by the European Union and has consequently been blacklisted, what measures or steps will government be adopting to rectify this development under this government's watch?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, yes, this is the outcome of inactivity of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. But let me just say also that these are all members of Global Forum. We, Trinidad and Tobago, at this time, do not report to Global Forum. So therefore, do not report to the Council, right? And this matter has been comprehensively dealt with by the authority in Trinidad and Tobago, the Attorney General. But let me just say what has happened here. For clarity, Trinidad and Tobago chose in 2011 to subject itself to Global Forum oversight. And in 2014, reinforced that position but did nothing to put us in a position to execute that commitment. And therefore, now that we are being lumped with those who are in that basket, what is not being said is that in the last 24 months, this government has done yeoman service in trying to bring us to a position to avoid these kinds of labels. Exactly. So I'm happy to hear that my friends on the other side are interested in our collaboration, but the information as presented here is not accurate, and is not an accurate reflection of our status.
Member for Caroni Central, supplemental.
Yeah, supplemental to the Honorable Prime Minister. Are there things on the agenda now that the government is pursuing to ensure that we are delisted from the blacklist?
Prime Minister.
The answer is yes, Madam Speaker, and the Attorney General addressed this matter twice in recent moments and in recent weeks, and I would like to request of my colleagues that it is useful to pay attention to what the government says. What the government said in the last 3 weeks and the last 2 weeks would make it a comprehensive situation that we are on top of this. There are things to be done, and the Attorney General has made a lot of progress with respect to our qualification.
Member for Point of Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 4 to the Honourable Prime Minister. In view of the Petrotrin's internal audit report on the fake oil scandal involving A&V Oil and Gas, and which was supported and confirmed by 2 reputable global auditing firms, could the Prime Minister indicate whether his government intends to immediately suspend the A&V Oil and Gas contract and refer this matter to the fraud squad for a criminal investigation?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I notice that members on the other side are particularly excited about this matter and very previous about it. I simply will want to say to members on the other side that this country is run in an orderly fashion. And I would like to ask my colleague on that, what would you say if the board of an authority is dealing with my matter under serious legal advice and is pursuing investigations, both its internal audit, its external auditors, and then the cabinet comes in, or the Prime Minister comes in and exercising authority doesn't have. The Prime Minister and the cabinet have no authority to enter any contract at Petrotrin. That is a matter for the board. Contracts in Petrotrin are a matter for the board. If you want to ask my view on the matter, that's a different story. But don't ask me to fire anybody in Petrotrin in a contract. I have no local standard in there, nor does the cabinet. And if the cabinet jumps into that matter prematurely, you will be the first one to accuse the cabinet of misconduct.
Supplemental, member for Point of Peer.
Supplemental to the Honourable Prime Minister. Can I get your views on this matter then?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, my views would be guided by the information and the views coming out of Petrotrin by way of its position, of its inquiries, its advisors, and its actions. And I simply want to point out to my colleagues on the other side, it is a board that is appointed by this government with a mandate to treat with all aspects of corruption in Petrotrin that has entered, that found this matter, and has dealt with it in the most best practice way. I don't know what you all are advocating. Petrotrin is investigating its business in the best possible way under sound legal advice. What exactly are you advocating?
Stop our own investigation.
Bearing in mind that the corporation sole, who is the Minister of Finance, the Petrotrin board responsible to him, would you seek to get the minister or the corporation sole working with the Petrotrin board on this matter, bearing in mind he's responsible for it?
Madam Speaker, that is precisely what is happening. There's a cabinet, there's a minister, there's a board. This matter is being addressed in the best possible way. My colleagues on the other side are very anxious for an outcome that they believe is damaging to somebody. But let me remind them, Madam Speaker, that when there was an audit at National Gas, the auditors were fired, and we never heard a thing about it after that. But now all of a sudden they want the government to jump into a process, and we are not doing that. We will await the outcome of the process so that when action is taken, the action could be defended in a court of law if it is challenged.
Supplemental, member for Caroni.
What time frame do you envisage? I know it's difficult, but what time frame that is reasonably appropriate before the conclusion of this matter.
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'm in no position to answer that question because that matter is entirely within the purview of the operations of Petrotrin that is being handled by a responsible board that is handling it responsibly. And I get the impression, Madam Speaker, that my colleagues are disappointed that the matter is being handled properly.
Correct. Member for Naparima, supplemental question.
The Prime Minister aware that the line minister gives general policy directives to the boards, and this is the existing best practices. And in that context, the minister is a member of the cabinet, which you lead.
Of course, I'm aware of that. And that is precisely why the minister will give no directive to derail the process.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 5 to the Honourable Prime Minister. Given the outstanding VAT arrears owed to the business community by the government, amounting to approximately 5.5 billion, could the Prime Minister inform this House when this issue will be addressed and promptly settled?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, this matter of the repayment of VAT to the business community is a very vexing matter, and I am sure that members on the other side will realize that 6 billion is more than 5.5 billion. We have been addressing this matter and reducing the amount of money. And of course, as part of the overall management of the country's finances, we'll make every effort to ensure that the VAT returns are paid in a timely manner, as we make every effort to collect the 6 billion outstanding VAT as well.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Prime Minister inform this House of the status of joint police army patrols in the constituency of Couva South and the wider country?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, the joint patrols where they exist, whether it's in Couva South, East, North, or West, those units are responding to the state of play in those communities. And as far as I'm aware this morning, the patrol in Couva South is functioning normally.
Member for Couva South, supplemental.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Prime Minister, taking into consideration that Mr. Dwayne Calendar, Chandrauti Hiralal, Nishad Radhe, and Pandit Sunil Rakbir Singh were all constituents of Couva South, were murdered in the last month, and as head of the National Security Council, do you have the records from the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defense Staff as to when did a joint army police patrol last take place in the constituency of Couva South?
Madam Speaker, if my colleague from Couva South believes that the Prime Minister has that information, he obviously doesn't understand the structure of administration in this country.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Prime Minister inform this House when specific legislation to address sexual harassment in the workplace will become part of the government's legislative agenda?
Madam Speaker, I expect that given what is happening around us, local, regional, and worldwide, that such a development will take place. And when it does take place, Madam Speaker, I trust that my colleagues on the other side will join us and support it. Because as a father of 2 women, I would not want the workplace to remain the way it is, where members who go as far as to find themselves charged for rape get themselves elected without let or hindrance in this country and become the heroes, whether it's in the labor movement, in the political arena, or anywhere else in this country. So I expect that it will come sometime. Maybe you can bring the motion, and we will support it. But if you don't bring it, we will bring it, and I hope you will support it.
Supplemental member for Couva South.
Given the Prime Minister's commitment, Madam Speaker, is the Prime Minister prepared to relieve Mr. Raul Balgobin as the chairman of the board of Angostura?
I'm not going to permit that as a supplemental question.
Questions?
Member for Shagona Cease.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question to the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. With 16 murders in 4 days, can the Attorney General maintain to the national community that the government is in control of the crime situation?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will certainly maintain that after the debate which is to come on anti-gang legislation in a short while, because the government is doing its very best to do its part of it. It really does depend upon the opposition today.
Supplemental member for Shigona Cease.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Is it possible, can the Honourable Attorney General give us some comfort and as a nation in terms of what is or will be done to alleviate the situation?
I would be comforted if true patriots stood in this Parliament, addressed the laws that the Parliament has the power to bring, which a government can table. For instance, the anti-gang law, without being anticipatory. I'd be very comforted if my colleagues opposite would all stand and say that what is good for them when in government is good for the country when they are out of government. And that's what I do.
Member for Shigona Cease, supplemental.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Attorney General, for the records, will you be able, are you in a position to indicate what specific plans you are contemplating to address this spiral crime situation?
Madam Speaker, the plans that the government has afoot include the completion of the improvements to the criminal justice system. 1 year of parliamentary work has been afoot at that. Secondly, to create a criminal division, which is a merger of the magistracy and the High Court. Thirdly, to deal with the backlog, which has been identified. Fourthly, to complete the removal of offences from the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Court. Fifthly, to institute and complete the work which we're nearly finished on a public defender's system, a national prosecution agency, which involves a marriage between the DPP and the Commissioner of Police. We also intend to bring anti-gang legislation to the forefront of this charge so that the interruption for criminal activity can have a fighting chance. We also intend to complete the fit-out of recommendations pursuant to the police manpower audit, some of which included the fact of the need for constitutional reform at the Service Commission level. We further intend to bring the white-collar crime, follow the money fraud package to take the profit out of crime. That's where Life to the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act, money laundering, etc., come to the forefront, and where people may be surprised to understand that that is how you treat with crime, for instance, by including it into schedules of law that you're going to debate, etc., to treat with activity. And we also intend to support the Minister of National Security in ensuring that the intelligence agencies and the operational forces of government together work in unison.
Member for Faizabad.
To the Minister of Education. Okay. Can the Minister indicate how much money is outstanding to private secondary schools which have enrolled students on behalf of the Ministry of Education?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Education, the amount of money owed to private secondary schools for the first term of academic year 2017-2018 as at 6 December 2017 is $709,200. This is further disaggregated as follows: Christ College, $175,200, CUC, $534,000. These outstanding bills are currently being processed for payment.
Supplemental member for Faizabad.
Speaker, Minister, can you indicate how many students are allocated to these private secondary schools by these current arrangements?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, unfortunately, I do not have that information with me.
Supply, perhaps in writing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Questions on notice? Questions for oral answer?
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we will be answering all oral questions. There were no written questions.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member of Oropouche West, question number 29 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the government is committed to the development of compressed natural gas as a major transportation fuel. Based on this commitment, the grant of fiscal incentives benefiting a cross-section of participants, ranging individuals to installers, at a competitive price compared to liquid fuels, there has been an upsurge in the interest and the adoption of CNG as a transportation fuel of choice. In this regard, the number of vehicles utilizing CNG has doubled from 1,522 in 2014 to approximately 3,000 vehicles in 2017, based on demand, and based on demand is expected to increase significantly in the ensuing years. To maintain this momentum, NGC CNG has been given the mandate for the sustained development of a CNG as a transportation fuel. To this end, NGC CNG is committed to the accelerated conversions of motor vehicles. By 2020, it is estimated that there will be a whopping 19,000 vehicles using CNG. This will result in the displacement of 10%, or 100 million liters of liquid fuels per annum, and generate a saving of 181 million based on current fuel prices. There are currently 3 approved converters, licensed converters that is, ANSA, Dumo, and Massey ACL. And the number will increase with the addition of VEMCOT, which recently received a conditional approval. With the exception of VEMCOT, all converters are private sector entities. Other firms have signaled intention to apply to conduct conversions as they are bolstered by the business prospect given the fuel pricing paradigm. In collaboration with the Ministry of Energy, NGC CNG has undertaken to assist licensed converters to treat with increasing demand for conversion. These initiatives include A, regular and routine coordination with converters to effectively program their conversion schedule based on feedback NGC CNG receives from the public. B, evaluation of converters' manpower requirement to meet the demand for conversions. 3, technical support as required. 4, very interestingly, the structuring of the NESC of training programs for the development of a cadre of individuals to perform as CNG service technicians to meet the needs of the converters. And E, discussions with MIC on the deepening of the skill base of the industry by creating a pool of trained technicians that can be absorbed into the conversion market. Given the projected growth of the CNG vehicles to the amount of 19,000, as I said before, by 2020, there will be a need to ramp up all aspects of the industry. Accordingly, the Ministry of Energy will be working closely with all the other relevant agencies, such as Town and Country Planning Division, EMA, OSHA, Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, NGC CNG, and NESC, to ensure that requisite services and support as appropriate is provided to the converters and other players that make up this expanding and growing industry.
John Shogonas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the Honourable Minister of Energy and Energy Industries indicate how many such technicians through the NESC and the MIC you intend to train? When will this training program commence, and will this training program be gate approved? Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
I cannot provide that answer this time, but I can surely make that information available.
Member for Caroni East.
Could you indicate, Honourable Minister, the source of that anticipated empirical data that you just spoke about, the projected 19,000 and the saving of 100, the source of that information?
Minister of Energy and Energy.
Well, once you have a projected 19,000, you can calculate the average fuel use per vehicle. The source is the NGC CNG and the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industry.
Supplemental question, Member for Shogonas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, can you say how many filling stations exist to cater for the CNG vehicles, and how many more you anticipate by when?
Minister of Energy and Energy.
I don't have that figure off the cuff, but we have, you see, every new station that we are opening, and we've been opening quite a lot, they have CNG components in it. And we are also going to build what we call a flagship CNG station at the famous Faris Al-Rawi roundabout, where we will be having 12 CNG filling booths.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 30 on behalf of, to the Minister of National Security on behalf of the member for Oropouche West.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Victim and Witness Support Unit, commonly referred to as VWSU, was birthed out of the transformation initiative within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and was operationalized in January 2008. The VWSU is an integral part of the citizen-centered approach in the police service and addresses the psychosocial elements of treating with the victims and witnesses of crime. This unit, Madam Speaker, does not rehabilitate cases. However, the purpose of the unit is to provide support to victims and witnesses of crimes through support groups and mediation training. In the aftermath of a crime, victims and witnesses often experience a range of emotions with limited assistance in restoring their personal equilibrium. Hence, the principal aim of the VWSU is to bridge the service gap between the police service, victims, and witnesses of crime through the development of policies, programs, and initiatives that will support these persons. In developing support to victims and witnesses, the core service and initiatives provided are as follows, Madam Speaker. Individual tailored support to meet the needs of victims and witnesses of crime, guidance through the criminal justice system, information on the progress of investigations, liaison services with other support agencies. The policy of the Victim and Witness Support Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is to ensure that victims and witnesses of crime are given the necessary emotional support along with the appropriate referrals to external support agencies, with the aim of minimizing the effects of victimization, thus empowering the individuals and facilitating their holistic recovery. The statistical outcome of cases are as follows. 44.5% of cases filed have been closed, 7% of the cases are being referred for external support, and 48.5% support services still being provided for cases. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the strategic objectives of the VWSU is to increase public trust and confidence by assisting the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in building meaningful relationships with other communities. There are right now, Madam Speaker, 21 positions that make up the technical staff of complements of the VWSU. Currently, there are 18 persons employed, with 3 additional victim support officers required to satisfy the staff contingent. Madam Speaker, it should be noted that the staff are qualified to provide support to victims and witnesses of crime. Thank you.
Member for Oropuch East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Oropuch East, question number 37 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Cabinet at its meeting of June 29, 2017, took the decision to ground the 4 AW139 helicopters of the Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard due to the high cost of maintenance associated with these aircraft. At the time, Cabinet was considering a proposal which had a cost of approximately $200 million per year. Given the economic situation which was being faced and is continuing to be faced by the country, Cabinet opted to have the helicopters grounded as a cost-saving measures. Pronouncements to this effect were made by the Honorable Prime Minister at the post-Cabinet media briefing of that date. Given this decision of Cabinet, those specific helicopters were not available to be put into operation in disaster relief efforts made by this country to assist the government and residents of Commonwealth of Dominica following the passage of Hurricane Maria in September 2017. It is to be noted, however, Madam Speaker, that the Honorable Prime Minister also indicated at the June 29 post-Cabinet media briefing that the Air Guard helicopters are not the only ones in service to the government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and made mention of the National Helicopter Limited while responding to a question from the media. It is to be noted, Madam Speaker, that with regard to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, assistant to Dominica, they were able to use the helicopters, the National Helicopter Services Limited, quite effectively, providing relief to the government and people of Dominica. Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of National Security, based on what he just said about the high maintenance costs, is the government considering the sale of these 4 Augusta Westland helicopters?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, the government is considering a number of options right now, including looking at the capability of the National Helicopter Services to deal with the maintenance support for the AW139 helicopters.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
That was answered, but based on the grounding and the depreciation aspect of these helicopters, is there anything urgent that the government is contemplating to deal with this matter while the depreciation of these helicopters continue to worsen?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, let me correct the announcement by the helicopters are not being depreciated. They're under what you call ground maintenance. So they're not being depreciated at all. They're maintained. And they're, in fact, under air operating certificate at this point in time. So they're not being deteriorated at all. Hence the reason they're placed in a specific kind of maintenance, ground maintenance right now.
Supplemental question, Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Could the Honourable Minister indicate, even though the EWS 139 are grounded, whether there is an existing maintenance contract, and if so, with whom and for what amount?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, yes, there is an existing contract with the National Helicopter Service, which has an AOC and an AMO at this point in time.
Supplemental question, Member for Kamutu Manzanilla.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, from what you just said, where the helicopters are grounded, is that in fact, therefore, that during the Beetham incidents, is it that the helicopters were not able to do aerial support for the police service?
National Security.
Madam Speaker, there are other helicopters available to National Security to conduct those type of operations.
Member for Oropuch East. Member for Oropuch East.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister had engaged me. Question number 38 to the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government on behalf of the member for Oropuch East.
Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The two-part question is, I want the answer to A. The answer is no. But however, I'd like the member to know that rehabilitation of the roadway known as Saunders Trace from Moruga Road to Guayagari was undertaken as part of the development of the Moruga region. The project was managed by the Rural Development Company of Trinidad and Tobago. The Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries has undertaken the development of a forest nursery at Saunders Trace, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, through the Urban Development Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago, plans to develop a 20-acre agro-processing facility which will also handle other light manufacturing activities related to agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. Much of the land surrounding Saunders Trace does in fact belong to Petrotrin. So, of course, its lease operators such as British Gas, API, Farm Exploration, Well Services, Trinity, and EV Oil and Gas Limited will benefit from the paving of this road. However, choosing this project as the focus was rather development of rural areas. At the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, we choose infrastructure projects based on how it can bring benefits to the residents and commuters in rural communities such as these. We have noticed that farmers and residents in the area benefit from this project. It is also a route between Moruga, Rio Claro, Guayagari, which speaks to aim to bring greater infrastructural connectivity to rural communities. The total sum of the contract was 10,520,830.21 VAT inclusive. 10 million. Yeah. There were savings on the actual works in the amount of $573,793. And the contractor, Calco Company Limited, did not use any contingencies. Therefore, this reduced the VAT and resulted in overall savings of 1.146,507.75. The total cost of the project was 9.374, 2.95.47. Thank you.
Member for Oropuch East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 39 to the Attorney General by the member for Oropuch East.
Attorney General. Member for Miaru.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Mayaro, question number 40 to the Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries.
Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries.
Madam Speaker, the Estate Management and Business Development Company Limited is responsible for the development of the residential lots previously owned by Carney 1975 Limited. The EMBD has advised that Gillingham Junction and Carney Savannah Road are in fact two separate residential sites. The site located at Gillingham Junction is referred to as the Chinchin residential site. The site located at Carney Savannah area is referred to as the Carney Savannah Road residential site. The status for both sites are as follows. The Chinchin residential site. The infrastructure works have been completed and approved by the Chaguanas Borough Corporation since August 2011. 807 lots were handed over to Carney 1975 Limited for distribution for the former Carney workers. According to the status report from Carney 1975 Limited, 502 leases have been executed for this site. In relation to the Carney Savannah Road residential site, the infrastructure works for the 490 lots on the site were completed in August 2015 and are still awaiting statutory approvals from the Drainage Division of the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Fire Services, and the Chaguanas Borough Corporation. It is expected that in order to obtain the above approvals, some minor additional works will be required, and once these approvals have been obtained, the lots will be distributed to the Carney workers. I thank you.
Supplemental question, member for Carney East.
What plans do you have for the remaining approximately 300 residential lots which have been completed for distribution for the Carney workers?
Madam Speaker, as far as the lots are available for distribution and the leases have been prepared, those leases will be distributed to the former Carney workers. In fact, Madam Speaker, contrary to what I've heard recently in the public domain, since assuming office, this administration has distributed more than 4,000 leases to former Carney 1975 workers.
Member for Mayaro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 41 to the Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries.
Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries.
Madam Speaker, over the last 24 months, the Ministry has effected works on 4 roads, access roads in the Mayaro constituency. These are Dade Straits A, Dade Straits B, and Settlement Road, Rio Claro, Dade Straits C, Dade Straits D in Rio Claro, the Rio Claro Food Crop Project, road known as A and road known as B, and then the Rio Claro Food Crop Project, the Approach Road and the road known as D. The date of request to repair these agricultural access roads was 23rd December 2015. And Madam Speaker, the request to repair these roads was made through the agricultural assistant assigned to the Rio Claro district and submitted to the Regional Administration South Office of the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. I thank you.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister, public business, government business, bill second reading.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Make Provision for the Maintenance of Public Safety and Order through Discouraging Membership of Criminal Gangs and the Suppression of Criminal Gang Activity and for other related matters be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, we're here today on the 6th of December 2017 to treat with the reintroduction of anti-gang legislation into the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. The bill before us is a mere 18 clauses long, and by way of reintroduction of laws, we are, for the record, treating with a very interesting phenomenon in Trinidad and Tobago, where this country, in 2011, took a deliberate decision to introduce anti-gang legislation onto the books of Trinidad and Tobago. The question is, why did the country do so in 2011? And in 2011, Act number 10 of 2011 came about. The feature of anti-gang legislation was introduced by then Attorney General Anand Ramlogan, first laid in the House of Representatives on the 16th of July 2010. On the 3rd of December 2010, a joint select committee actually came about, and 12 members of the House of Representatives and Senate together combined served on that joint select committee. Suffice it to say that sitting members of the current UNC opposition bench participated in that joint select committee. The joint select committee sat on 8 occasions. The clauses of the bill were considered in depth and in detail. There was agreement in that joint select committee. A report of the joint select committee stands on the Parliament's website. Hard copies of it are available. That report of the joint select committee shows Anand Ramlogan, Prakash Ramadar, Herbert Volney, Stephen Cadiz, Jairam C. Mangal, Subhash Pandey, Brigadier John Sandy, Marlene MacDonald, Colum Imbert, Fitzgerald Hinds, Corinne Baptiste McKnight, Elton Prescott. The contributors in the adoption of the report included Siparia and other members now present in this bench, Caroni Central, Chaguanas East, Couva South, St. Augustine, Oropuch East, Chaguanas, Caroni East. All participated. All gave fulsome support. All spoke to the brilliance of the work done in Joint Select Committee. In the Joint Select Committee, specific issues were decided. How to treat with a gang definition, how to treat with what a gang leader is, how to treat what criminal gang activity was to be defined in law, what the offenses should be in law, whether the offenses were proportionate offenses in law, whether the concept of treating with children should be properly considered, whether there should be an address by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and a simple form of statistical information was provided then. But in that Joint Select Committee, there was no significant disagreement amongst the members. In fact, we've done all of that properly. And so, Madam Speaker, the law to treat with criminal gang activity was born for the first time in Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, that law was assented to on the 23rd of May 2011, and it was proclaimed on the 15th of August 2011. It stood on the books of Trinidad and Tobago, 15th of August 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. 5 full years, that law stood on the books of Trinidad and Tobago.
Undisturbed.
Undisturbed. But in that period of time, for those 5 years, the law was allowed to be explored in particular by the country and, more importantly, by the judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll explain how that happened and what came about from that process. Specifically, we are aware that 6 days after the proclamation of the anti-gang law, on the 21st of August 2011, Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bisesa, the member for Siparia, she now sits and still sits, called a state of emergency, first described as a limited state of emergency, and then when that concept in law was pointed out as non-existent, it became a full state of emergency. In that state of emergency, 463 people were arrested under the anti-gang law. 213 of them were released by way of intervention of the Director of Public Prosecutions. 142 people were charged under the state of emergency for gang activity, charges still prevailing. And in our courts at present, in the Magistrates' Court, there are 33 anti-gang matters, and at the High Court, there are 40 anti-gang matters. Specifically, of the 142 people who were charged under the state of emergency, it's very interesting to note that this also includes persons who are well known to Trinidad and Tobago. And without going into the merits of any cases, they include the infamous Raji Ali. Just to let you know. While this has come to the attention of the court, there was a very excellent piece of work produced in the Stewart matter. And permit me to pull that. Coming to that. So, in the High Court, before the Honorable Madam Justice June Charles, a case came about asking the courts to consider the imposition of damages, exemplary damages, aggravated damages, to treat with what the claimant in that litigation described as false imprisonment and malicious prosecution. That case, Madam Speaker, which then went to the Court of Appeal in Civil Appeal number P162 of 2015, it's the case of the Attorney General and Kevin Stewart, also known as Kevin Stewart, two different spellings, S-T-U-A-R-T and S-T-E-W-A-R-T. The Honorable Mr. Justice Nolan Barrow reflected upon the anti-gang legislation specifically. He traversed the grounds as to what is required by way of evidence. He specifically used a very interesting term to be found in the judgment where he said that the anti-gang law was no slam dunk by way of evidence. That was a very interesting perspective to be found at page 12 of 28 of the Honorable Justice of Appeal's written judgment. And the Honorable Judge said, it is readily apparent from these provisions that proving gang membership in a court of law is no slam dunk. And the Honorable Justice of Appeal went into what is required by way of evidence to secure conviction. The Honorable Judge noted that there had to be the position of a gang membership relationship, that you had to have a gang, more than two persons, that you had to show an operation between the gang members, that any one of the scheduled offenses described in that law in the first schedule, be they possession of narcotics or possession of a firearm or kidnapping, that offense must be related to gang activity. The Honorable Judge went into how evidence ought to be produced to the courts, etc. And the Honorable Judge, in allowing the appeal of the state as it related to the Judge of First Instance's finding on false imprisonment and malicious prosecution, he allowed in part, he said, look, I will give damages for false imprisonment. I will say that the arrest was improper, but I won't go so far as to say it's malicious prosecution. And he said so because he said that it was clear that evidence in this case had not been gathered in accordance with what one should logically associate with evidence of this type. That ties back into the issue as to how and why so many people were released. Of the 463 people arrested under the old, now expired anti-gang law, 213 of them were released. And they were released quite simply because the evidence behind their arrest and the charge for the offenses under the anti-gang legislation were not proved. The courts in Trinidad and Tobago therefore made no reflection at all negatively that the anti-gang law was bad law. In fact, it said, quite simply, it said the opposite, because the court fell squarely to consider the anti-gang law itself. What happened was, and this came about in terms of preparation for evidence, then Attorney General Ram Logan, in dealing with the state of emergency, simply said, go out and charge and find the evidence after. That's what happened in the anti-gang operationalization 6 days after assent. Now, Madam Speaker, this law, the expired law, fell because there was a sunset clause attached to the Act number 10 of 2011. And that sunset clause was that the law would expire after 5 years. And if the Parliament did not convene itself and agree to extend that time frame, the law would fall apart. Madam Speaker, most interestingly, the government came in June of 2016, told the nation that on the 17th of June 2016, by way of a bill laid in this House, we told the nation this government wishes to extend the life of the Anti-Gang Act and to extend the life of the Bail Act, which was amended as a corollary to the Anti-Gang Act, for a period of 2 years to August 2018, so that we can assess the situation. In the debate which occurred then, none other than the leader of the opposition told this country it essentially was a position which could not be supported, that the opposition would not allow for the continuation of the law to prevail, the anti-gang law and the amendments to the Bail Act, because in their estimation, they required statistical evidence to be produced to the Parliament to show how the Act operated or not. And they related that to the tie-in of the sunset clause and the rationale for sunset clauses. We in the government pointed out in that debate, and we said to the country, you, the outgoing government, did not do the exercise of analysis behind the anti-gang law. We accept that you didn't do it. Allow us, the present government, the opportunity to keep this law and to bring the assessment, and we will extend it to 2018. Let's keep the position in effect. The opposition said to the country that that was a no-go, that that will not happen, and they voted down the bill with 22 members of the government saying yes, and 18 members, every man, jack, honorable member as they sit and stand of the opposition, said no to the anti-gang law, and therefore the law collapsed. What happened next, Madam Speaker? The anti-gang law collapsed. And what does that mean? The population may say, well, you have laws that treat with firearms, narcotics, you have laws that treat with all sorts of offenses, kidnapping, etc., all contained in the first schedule of the expired anti-gang law. Why don't you treat with that? That's true. The common law and statutory offenses which exist in this country do allow for arrest, prosecution, and conviction of those offenses under the specific areas of law as they stand. But they do not do what the anti-gang law does, which is to specifically allow for the interruption of criminal activity by going for an offense of gang membership or gang relationship or gang support. And instead it requires you, if you don't have this law, to go and pick up every firearm, every piece of narcotics, and go through those things. So we know in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, that that experimentation with the implementation of the existing laws has not borne fruit for generations. Notwithstanding the fact that in Trinidad and Tobago today, detection and recovery of firearms is at an all-time high. Notwithstanding the fact, I see Naparima laughing as he usually does, the detection and pickup of firearms in this country is at an all-time high. The fact is, 4,674 firearms have been picked up. But what is that in the period 2010 to 2017? What does that mean if murders are going up as well? Because the true barometer of crime is murder. And murders are climbing. And the law without an anti-gang offense means that arrest and conviction for murder, arrest and conviction for firearm possession, arrest and conviction for narcotics, whilst those numbers are going up, the society is getting no relief. And so the anti-gang legislation, which treats with how a country is able to interrupt the activity, becomes a very real conversation. Currently in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, we have a very interesting phenomenon of videos circulating wild across the media, which show gang number 1, Rasta City, gang number 2, what is referred to as the Muslim gangs, unruly ISIS or other Muslim gangs, in active video circulation demonstrating shooting off firearms, people with faces. That is evidence of gang activity. That is evidence which can be used to support a prosecution and conviction under the anti-gang law. But by itself, it's not a crime. You cannot take a video of a firearm to the Forensics Firearms Institute. You cannot take it to the Forensics Institute and say, this video shows a man with a firearm, because the law as currently constructed, to give you an example, says to be guilty of possession of a firearm, it must be a firearm. For it to be a firearm, forensics has to certify it is a firearm. They have to receive it, they have to analyze it, the armorer's report comes, it is then tendered in court, and that's how you get charged and convicted for possession of a firearm without lawful excuse. A video of someone shooting a firearm is not possession of a firearm or utilization of a firearm known to law. But under the anti-gang law, specifically in the 2011 law and in this bill before us, the evidence of those videos are in fact supportive evidence of gang activity and being a gang member and being in criminal gang activity which can lead to prosecution and conviction. So that's to give you a real example of how this anti-gang law is different from the standalone laws, be they at common law or under statute. But Madam Speaker, we didn't just arrive. We took the position of the opposition's refusal to support the anti-gang legislation. Their decision resulted in the collapse of the law. The bail laws as amended in Trinidad and Tobago between 1994, when the Bail Act came about, straight up to 2015, all of them collapsed right back down to the law in 1994. The positions of no bail if your trial starts within 120 days and you are kept out of the system, all collapsed. All of that happened, and the government was told, bring statistics. So what did we do? We, in fact, drafted anti-gang legislation, now before the Parliament. We took that legislation, we sent it out for stakeholder comments. In the stakeholder comments, we specifically wrote to the judiciary by way of letter July 6, 2017, asking them for comments. We wrote to the Commissioner of Police, July 6, 2017, asking for comments. We wrote to the DPP, July 6, 2017, asking for comments. We wrote to the Law Association by way of same date, asking for comments. And then we specifically engaged in an exercise with the opposition, which culminated in an event on July 18, 2017, where the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and the Honourable Prime Minister met and held discussions to treat with a number of issues as to how the government and opposition could operate. And in that meeting, the Leader of the Opposition identified an opposite to the Attorney General to receive information on any laws which we propose to advance. And Senator Gerald Ramdeen was identified, and we specifically, by way of letter dated August 4th, 2017, wrote to Senator Ramdeen and provided him with the draft anti-gang legislation. But we did something further. We not only did that, we provided the opposition with the affidavit of Stephen Williams, which was filed in High Court proceedings and which dealt with chapter and verse of the position of anti-gang laws as a requirement in the suite of laws in Trinidad and Tobago, the statistics of gang activity, the setup and operation of the divisions. We also provided them with a document entitled Trinidad and Tobago Gang Review 2016 to 2017, where we gave all of the statistical information, number of gangs, number of gang members across the divisions, gangs per police division, where we dealt with the comparative chart as it related over the years. And very particularly, we said to the opposition that we wish, if you so desire, to sit together with you and work towards a consensual bill. Listen to the wording in the letter. We are willing to sit with the opposition along and work towards a consensual bill that deals with the unsatisfactory gang position that exists in Trinidad and Tobago. August 4th, September, no response. What happened next? We had to write again. We actually wrote, forgive me, not September, no response. End of August, no response. 17th of August, we again wrote to the leader of the opposition through her designated appointee, Senator Ramdeen, asking for their views and positions on this. It was only on the 28th of September 2017 that the leader of the opposition responded, she herself to the Honorable Prime Minister. And the essence of the letter from the leader of the opposition to the Honorable Prime Minister is as follows. You shouldn't have written to Senator Ramdeen. You should write to me. I'm the head of the division. We note that you've sent us 2 interesting pieces of law, because we also sent something called the Special Zones of Operation Law for the opposition's comment. And specifically with respect to the anti-gang legislation, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition says, the draft Anti-Gang Bill 2017 mirrors in many important respects the provisions of the Anti-Gang Act 2011. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition then says that for the operation of this law, there must be successful prosecutions, and she noted that it was an abysmal state of affairs. She noted a novelty of a particular provision which we had added into that draft law, which allowed for seizure and forfeiture of property prior to conviction in certain circumstances. And the Honourable Leader of the Opposition effectively said, you need to have proper intelligence to run this. You need to make sure that there's an anti-gang unit, because the Leader of the Opposition said, as you will be aware, most of the members of the last unit are now before the court charged with multiple capital offences. And the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said that there must also be a proper witness protection program. The Leader of the Opposition then reflected upon, in a very vague sort of way, that the definition, legislative definition of gang, gang member, and gang activity required some form of improvement, but she didn't specify what that was. And then the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said that careful collaboration is required with the Chief Parliamentary Council. The Opposition's view was also that the DPP should be involved, law association, criminal bar, etc. And that was the end of that. The next thing that happened is, of course, that we wrote incessantly to all of the stakeholders that I've just described. And what I can tell you is that we've received no comments from the judiciary. We've received no comments from the DPP. We've received no comments from the law association or the criminal bar. We have received, by way of comments in sit-down occasions with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, certain comments which are reflected in this bill. But, Madam Speaker, I want to put this onto the record. Whilst we are engaged in this legislative exercise of consultation in respect of a law which existed on the books of Trinidad and Tobago for 5 full years with no judicial pronouncement that the law is insufficient or inadequate, whilst we sat with a law for 5 years and the opposition is telling us consult some more and provide us with statistics, the following position has happened. The data on gang-related murders demonstrates that in the period 2010 to 2017, gang-related murders are estimated at 998. The firearms are close to 4,674 for the same 7-year period. That's seizures. The particular provision is quite interesting because in providing the Leader of the Opposition and her team with the affidavit of Stephen Williams, the position of the anti-gang, Stephen Williams, the Honourable Acting Commissioner of Police, in providing that affidavit evidence which spoke to particulars, at the time that the Commissioner of Police spoke to the issue of gang activity, he estimated the number of gangs at 2014 to be 92, number of gang members to be 1,500, that gang-related murders were approximately 35% of murders. In 2016, because I told you that we provided the Honourable Leader of the Opposition with a specific document showing the 2016-2017 gang statistics. The statistics were that gangs had grown from 92 to 179. Number of gang members had grown from 1,500 to 2,038. In June 2017, we obtained information, and in fact, on the 30th of November 2017, I went into the public domain and I told Trinidad and Tobago that we've now reached 211 gangs with 2,459 members. And when you compare the position in 2014 to 2017, let me put that in percentage points. The number of gangs has increased by 129%. The number of gang members has increased by 63%. We then, Madam Speaker, in our publication to the country in the press conference, we identified Northeastern Division as 15 gangs with 256 members. Port of Spain Division, 41 gangs with 574 members. Central Division, 10 gangs with 106 members. Southern Division, 19 gangs with 202 members. Eastern Division, 9 gangs with approximately 121 members. Northern Division, 23 gangs with 324 members. Southwestern Division, 21 gangs with 178 members. Western Division, 49 gangs with 533 members. Tobago, 24 gangs with 190 members. We then, Madam Speaker, informed the population that the intelligence agencies know by street name, by gang leader identification, by member identification, throughout the 9 divisions in Trinidad and Tobago, all the gang members suspected to be gang members. And we were able to do that because the country is well aware that this government came and amended the SSA Act and specifically changed the focus of the SSA away from narcotics only and into something which we defined in law as serious crime. And serious crime includes gang activity, anti-terrorism, money laundering, etc. Because we changed the focus of intelligence. And we are telling this country, through this parliament, through you today, Madam Speaker, that there has been an exponential rise in gang activity. But Madam Speaker, it doesn't stop there. The rise in gang activity has also been measured by the creation of agencies to treat with this. So we've told you about the SSA's refocus, but the government didn't stop there. Through our agitations at the National Security Council, we encouraged the Commissioner of Police to treat with the gang activity in a different way. And therefore, Madam Speaker, the OCIU, the Organized Criminal Investigation Unit, was created, being a merger of the OCNFB, the Organized Crime, Narcotics and Firearm Bureau, and the Criminal Gang Intelligence Unit. And we took the numbers by way of a launch in September. We added 159 officers to that. But we didn't stop there. We also supported the active placement of witnesses into the Justice Protection Program, and there is standalone law for that, Madam Speaker. The Witness Protection Program has currently 221 members in witness protection. It is the Justice Protection Act, Chapter 533, and we treated with that. But Madam Speaker, creation of a unit, improvement of intelligence, having witness protection is all for naught if we don't cause the disruption of gang activity by having a gang law, anti-gang law. And Madam Speaker, I want to point out something. In Jamaica in 2014, an anti-gang law was produced. It was produced into a piece of law called the Criminal Justice Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act 2014. Jamaica produced a piece of law. Yesterday, the leader of the opposition, who was Prime Minister when this law passed, did the opposite of what Trinidad and Tobago sees in its opposition, in its pronouncements. And the leader of the opposition, Bunting, congratulates not anybody else other than the JCF, the Jamaican Constabulary Force. And here's what he says. The opposition spokesman on national security, Peter Bunting, is congratulating the Jamaica Constabulary Force on its first conviction under the Criminal Justice Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act, more commonly known as the anti-gang legislation. Mr. Bunting stated, for the first time in Jamaica, we have membership in criminal organizations being effectively addressed by the law. No longer are the police constrained to wait on gangsters to commit heinous crimes as they have been provided with a robust law that can preempt atrocities against the people without infringing on hard-won rights. The law is being made to work for us, closing in on modern-day criminal enterprise. Mr. Bunting explained that by design, the anti-gang legislation can be used to disrupt criminal organizations, suppressing criminal activity, and restore a sense of security in the society. Bunting continued, this strategic legislation was implemented in 2014. As a key tool for law enforcement, if used effectively, it will serve as a strong deterrent to gang affiliation generally. So Bunting, leader of the opposition, says, when I passed law in 2014 to treat with anti-gang behavior, I am now, as leader of opposition, congratulating the courts on their first matter. Well, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have 40 cases in the High Court, 33 in the Magistrates' Court, 142 matters outstanding, and this opposition says to the country, not good enough. No law. Let's talk some more. Always. Madam Speaker, what we can say is that in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a very interesting situation. Every month that we talk is murder upon murder, crime upon crime. Madam Speaker, since the law expired August 2016 to now, there have been 709 murders. Since the law expired, the anti-gang law, to now, there have been 709 murders. Firearms seized, 1,195 since August 2016 to now. So let's talk some more. Let's ask questions in Parliament about what you're going to do with murders. Let's have a select committee. So, Madam Speaker, we've given documents, we've given legislation, August, September, October, November, December we now stand. Not a peep. We've given data, we've given statistics, we've given more than actually came before the Joint Select Committee. And Madam Speaker, when you look to the report of the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Anti-Gang Bill 2010, Bail Amendment Bill 2010, what I am explaining to you on the floor of the Parliament right now, nothing of the level of detail of what I have just told the country was inside of this Joint Select Committee. Nothing. But Madam Speaker, let's get to the bill, because I'm very passionate about this issue. Very passionate about this issue. Madam Speaker, in our legislation, we come back with 18 clauses. 4 of them have nothing to do with law at all, really. What are they? Short title, commencement, act inconsistent with Constitution, and the amendment to the first and second schedule. So clause 1, clause 2, clause 3, and clause 18 are what you call, in common parlance, bush. Nothing to do with law. We have 14 clauses only, and of those 14 clauses, Madam Speaker, clause 5 is a repetition of the old law. Clause 6 is a repetition of the old clause 5 with some form of small amendment, which I'll explain. Clause 7 is a repetition of the old clause 6. Clause 8 is a new clause, which I will explain. Clause 9 is a repetition of the old clause 8. Clause 10 is a repetition of the old clause 7. Clause 11 is a repetition of the old clause 9. Clause 12 is actually merged with clause 13 as a split between what was the old clause 10, and I'll explain that. Clause 14 is the old clause 11. Clause 15 is the old clause 12 with some amendments. Clause 16 is the detention of persons with similar to the old clause 13 with some few amendments, which I'll explain. Clause 17 is the old clause 14. So we have 14 clauses buried in the same law that was good enough for the opposition for 5 years. 5 years good enough for the opposition. Good enough for Jamaica opposition and government to prevail, notwithstanding change in positions. But I'm reading in the papers today a statement by the member for Point a Pair, which quite frankly has me in the state and condition I am now. I am angry and I am upset that Trinidad and Tobago could be in a position where the opposition will not stand up as patriots for their country and talk to the criminal gang activity. Madam Speaker, The Betham exercise which went down, which was the law enforcement taking the fight to gang leaders. Everybody knows, ask Oropuchis who Spanish is and who chemist is. Everybody in this country knows. The same way the new Robocop. But Trinidad and Tobago has to be held ransom to people who support gang leaders trying to push back against the police. And that's good enough for the opposition. So, Madam Speaker, in our definitions clause in clause 4, we propose, I have nothing to listen to by way of crosstalk. We listen to the debate here on the floor. Madam Speaker, we have tightened by way of language the definition of gang. We've specifically brought in something called gang-related activity. And I want to point out what we've done here in modifying this definition. We have taken Section 66 of the Interpretation Act, which is the clause which treats with the inchoate offenses, meaning aiding, abetting, counseling, anything that is ancillary to the offense, and we've added it into the law. By doing that, we therefore get a release from the thick language which appeared in the Act, where you have to describe all aiding and abetting and counseling, etc. We put it in the definition. We've brought to life Section 66 by way of the Interpretations Act application in this time by way of express statement. We have, Madam Speaker, removed the definition of bulletproof vest, removed the definition of harboring from the old law, really because they're self-explanatory and don't need to be defined. We have also treated with the addition of prohibited weapon, because firearms do not include prohibited weapons, which include noxious substances, etc., and that was an omission from the previous law. We've amended the definition of a school, specifically to include recreation grounds or parks where children are located. And I may need to correct myself, Bunting is the opposition spokesman, not the leader of the opposition in Jamaica, so I just stand corrected on that point. Clause 5 of the bill is where we split between Clause 5 and Clause 6 what was a very difficult Clause 5 in the old law. We've taken the offenses, put it into Clause 6. We've treated with how evidence is to be treated in Clause 5. We've used the same formula for evidence as in the old law, that insignias, etc., are not necessary, but we've added in, very importantly, in subclauses A to G, we've borrowed from the Jamaican anti-gang legislation, lifted from their Section 6.3 of their Act, and added in the material which will allow us to use documents or videos, etc., to catch that kind of activity as it exists in Trinidad and Tobago. In the offenses, as they appear throughout the bill, Clause 6 go down, etc., and we've introduced parts into this bill to make it more user-friendly. The parts of offenses, etc., didn't exist before. Those are just headings. We have specifically targeted out a gang leader from a gang member. And what we have done is to maintain the same provisions. Clause 6 is the same as the old 5.1a and b. That's Clause 6.1. Clause 6.2 is the same as the old 5.2. Clause 6.3 is the same as the old Clause 5.1. What we've done in subclause 4 is to add in intelligence, because sub 4 is where you treat with law enforcement officers being in gang activity. And we saw it as an omission not to have intelligence agencies like members in the SSA being caught by that prohibition. Madam Speaker, that again repeats in subclause 5, 6.5. Clause 7, which treats with coercion, etc., is specifically a repeat of Clause 6, except we've added in the creature of the gang leader to be more prominent into that clause. Clause 8, Madam Speaker, is a new clause. And Clause 8 is specifically where we introduce what exists in the Jamaican law, which is something called retaliatory action. And I know Minister Hinds will speak to this in more detail. In Jamaica, in their Section 13 of their Act, which is similar to our Clause 8, we have said that if somebody who is involved in gang activity takes retaliatory action against somebody who's trying to give evidence, against somebody who wants to leave a gang, against somebody who simply says, no, you can't occupy my HDC home to use it for gang activities. You can't prejudice my family because my son wants to leave your gang. That is captured in Clause 8 of the bill. And there's precedent for it in Section 13 of the Jamaican Act. Clause 9 of the bill is in essence a simplification of what was the old Section 8 of the anti-gang law. And in that, It operates because specifically we've amended the definition of gang activity to bring to life the inchoate crimes, aiding, abetting, counseling, etc. And therefore we had a simplification of the law in Clause 9. Clause 10 is the old Section 7, but we've deleted attempts, again because of the introduction of the definition taking into account the inchoate crimes. Clause 11 is similar to the old Section 9. What we have done is to add in a very interesting clause which says that a person who possesses or under his care or control bulletproof vest, firearm, prohibited weapon, etc., whether lawfully obtained or not, which he uses or ought reasonably to know would be used for the benefit of a gang, etc., is guilty of an offense. And that comes about by way of reading the judgment of the Court of Appeal as to what the individual elements should look like in getting the kinds of conviction that we want. Clause 12, how much time? We split in Clause 12 and Clause 13 the concept of harboring and concealing. We're specifically providing there that we treat with it by offering a defense for harboring and concealing. And we do that by putting an onus, which is constitutional under Section 5 of the Constitution, to reverse the burden upon the accused in those circumstances. Clause 14, we've added a novelty by instead of going simply on one route, either indictable or summary, we've allowed the prosecution the ability to go on triable either way. It is in that clause also that we introduce school. If you're going to recruit a child, you're going to be caught by the expanded definition of a school. Clause 15 is where we treat with police powers of entry and search. And this is very similar to the old Section 11. And what we've done is to simply pull out the concept of the gang leader there. Clause 16, which is the detention, is the one that deserves some attention. It's similar to Section 13 of the old law. What we've done specifically is to allow for the replacement of a superintendent by an assistant superintendent. You can detain. You can detain for 72 hours. It must be reviewed by an assistant superintendent. But if you want to go further, we're saying go to a judge of the High Court and not a magistrate. There's a stricter burden inside of there. And what we're also doing there is to say that instead of holding you for 144 hours in further detention, that you can get 14 days. And that 14 days is to harmonize the approach under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Forfeiture of property is the same. The schedule, the first schedule, is amended by adding in offenses under the Anti-Terrorism, Proceeds of Crime Act, and Sedition Act. And I want to say for the record, because the time is very short, these have direct precedence in the Jamaican law. They have direct relationship to our obligations to fight the profits of crime as dictated by FATF, CFATF, by Global Forum, matters for which we have been blacklisted by other entities and organizations for failures on the part of the last government. But, Madam Speaker, they must be included if we are to be taken seriously in the nations around the world that are viewed to have best practice. Madam Speaker, I'll say a lot more in wind-up, and my colleagues will add a lot more in terms of flesh. Suffice it to say, this law is good law. This law has not received negative reflection from the courts of Trinidad and Tobago. We've repeated the guts of the law. There are only 14 clauses here. A normal committee, we've done committee work with hundreds of clauses as a committee of the whole. This law is necessary because the individual laws for firearm possession, for kidnapping, etc., don't go as far. It is urgent in light of the fight against crime. We've put in the operational structures, criminal gang activity, surveillance, etc., and we expect the opposition to distinguish itself today and tell us how they intend to support Trinidad and Tobago's fight against crime. I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled an act to make provision for the maintenance of public safety and order through discouraging membership of criminal gangs and the suppression of criminal gang activity and for other related matters be now read a second time. Member for Naparima.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened to the Honourable Member for San Fernando West And I want to say that philosophically there is a fundamental difference between those on that side and those on the opposition benches. And it deals, Madam Speaker, philosophically with our approach. If we go to the scriptures, Madam Speaker, in the book of Proverbs, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he grows old, he will not depart. We see children differently, not to jail and to lock up, but as gems to be nurtured. In the Holy Quran, in Surah 17, verse 17.
Just a minute, please. Members, I understand the whole sort of eagerness for this debate. I remind members with respect to the provisional standing order 53.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the Holy Quran, in Surah 17, verse 70, I quote, and surely we have honored the children of Adam, and we carry them in the land and the sea, and we provide them with good things, and we have made them to excel highly most of those whom we have created. And in the Vedas, Madam Speaker, they speak about children, and they say, through children we obtain immortality. And in the African proverbs about the society bringing up a child, our children are gems. They are children of God to be honored and not basically to be locked up and jailed, etc. But why are we here in Parliament? After all the old talk, the real reasons we are here is because this government has failed to address crime. With murders, Madam Speaker, now exceeding last year's count, and communities like Beetham seething with rage. This government is resorting to PR and seeking to pass blame for their incompetence. Madam Speaker, we look all over the world. They are aware of what is going on in Trinidad. 16 murders in 4 days. 16 murders, and one was murdered just on the outskirts of my constituency. A Canadian citizen, Vishnu Narayan, 56. He was visiting relatives. And in the Canadian media, Madam Speaker, I have lists, my friends tell me what is going on in Trinidad. And this government, instead of dealing frontally with crime, comes with a PR thing, a bad legislation, which they know we will oppose, so that they could put the blame on us and say that we are not supporting them in the battle of crime. That is the right. Meanwhile, all over Toronto, all over Canada and the United States, they are talking about crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And I will make the point. And I'm reading from the Daily Express, Tuesday, 5th December, the police planned meeting to discuss the murder of Serge. Madam Speaker, it tells me something. They are holding a meeting after the crime of Serge. In my research, in terms of gang units, and that is one of the fundamental things that was raised by the DPP concerning the inadequacy of this legislation. Gang units, I'll come to that later. Gang units provide information and significant information on the name, dates, telephone numbers, any information that they have with respect to DNA, with respect to an individual. So if in the United States a gang leader or a gang member sneezes, the gang unit knows. And I could go into specifics about that. So when I get data, that is what I call global generic data. We have so many gangs, and we say we know. I know they do not know. And how do I know they do not know? Because they beat them, they arrested 2 persons in Beetham, and they did not know, they did not have the intelligence to anticipate what would have happened, and they would have been caught flat-footed. So I want to make, if the problem really is that we have 462 murders, and we know, and they suspect that it is going to head for 500, they have ways in, if we had a proper gang unit, they would be able to go to they would know all the gang members, they would be able to go to them, and they would be able to say to them, we expect increased activity, and we will be monitoring you. This is what they do in the United States. That is what. You're not arresting them. You speak to them. You give advice. Madam Speaker, they would wish us to feel that the two bills are Madam Speaker, they would wish us to believe the two bills are the same. The 211 Act and the present bill are not the same legislation. The 2011 bill had a sunset clause. And this new bill has 3 new offenses to the schedule. Schedule 26, offenses under the Anti-Terrorism Act. 27, offenses under the Proceeds of Crime Act. And 28, offenses under the Sedition Act. Tell me, what does the Anti-Terrorism and the Sedition Act have to do with gang members, Madam Speaker? Tell me the real reason. What is the real reason? It may be that these things are included to target persons who support the opposition or who oppose this government. What does sedition have to do with anti-crime legislation? We introduced a sunset clause. They have not. A sunset clause is a statutory provision providing that a particular agency, benefit or law, will expire on a particular date. It gives an opportunity to contemplate, reflect on, see the inadequacies of the legislation, and see what we are going to do to improve it. It is useful to, and in the literature, it is useful to compel the legislature, the Congress, to periodically re-examine its delegation of authority and to assess the utility of those delegations in the light of experience. But the Honorable Member for San Fernando West said, and it's quoted in Hansard, in 2011, I'm quoting, in 2011, we put in with unanimous support, full opposition support, sunset clause for 5 years. He said so.
Yes, if you're quoting Hansard, you will have to say
The 7th of the 1st, 2016.
Read it. We don't trust you.
I'm saying we put in, the Honourable Member said, we put in with unanimous support, full PNM opposition support, sunset clause for 5 years. But yet in Newsday, the 4th of December 2017, he says, and I quote, no sunset clause for the new anti-gang act, says the Attorney General. So he boasts on one hand about a sunset clause, and he comes afterwards and says that there's going to be no sunset clause. That's right. But we have raised a number of issues with the legislation, and the sunset clause provides us an opportunity to contemplate and reflect on the legislation. We have asked for data on the efficacy of the act. How many people were charged? He gave us data on that, and under the 2010 Act. But how many were convicted? Not a single one. What were the deficiencies of the 2010 Act? And how do the amendments address these specific deficiencies? What can we expect from this legislation? He has to come to tell the population what is the utility of this bill. How will it improve our lives, the lives of at-risk youth? It is not about locking them up. It is also about the peace, order, and good governance with respect to the people of the ghetto. How will it reduce crime and how much? They never give us a quantifiable measure and say, would it reduce crime by 10%? At least we have some measure to analyze the bill. If this legislation is passed, can it guarantee that the murder rate will be reduced by 10%? If you are so sure that this is necessary, if you are so sure that there's a utilitarian aspect to this thing, well, then tell us the result. We would support. What he has not told us are our police well-equipped, trained, and ready to implement this act. And I will point out later about how it operates in serious countries. Is our forensic science center up to the challenges of this new legislation? If this new legislation works and 2,000 gang members are arrested, does the forensic science center as it exists, is it capable of dealing with that additional burden? Can our remand yard cater for the deluge for young inmates if this act is successful?
Madam Speaker, 53F, I'm trying to listen to my member.
So, members, please listen in silence, and if there's need to speak, please, in hushed tones and limit the cross talk. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Is this legislation aimed at white-collar crime, or is it discriminatorily focused on the ghetto youths? Is this act duplicitous? And I will deal with that later in my presentation. Meaning that we already have laws in place to tackle these problems. We have laws to tackle these problems. The laws are not working, but we're putting additional laws to burden the system. Is this capriciously aimed to lock up anyone who is against the PNM and this government that is clueless and bankrupt of ideas? Is this a PR smokescreen, unconvincing as it may be, to give the false impression that the PNM is on top of the war on crime, when in effect the real reason is to bring bad legislation and then oppose us when we do not support it? And I want to tell my friends opposite, we will not be intimidated to pass bad legislation. We have a duty to this country, and we are sworn an oath to uphold the good governance of Trinidad and Tobago. Is the PNM not embarrassed that as we speak, we have already passed the murder rate for 2016? And you at your wits' end, come up and confess. We have no ideas. We are trying a thing with this legislation and help us in this game of hoodwinking Trinidad and Tobago. The Honorable Attorney General spoke about relevant stakeholder consultations. He said we wrote this and we wrote that person and we wrote the Law Association. What he didn't tell us is what were their inputs and how were their inputs utilized in creating good legislation. Did he speak to the different areas within the police service? And I'm talking drilling down beneath the Commissioner of Police, the gang unit, the officers who are involved in intelligence. Do they have the resources to give effect to this legislation? Has he spoken to the Social Welfare Department, the probationary services, to see whether they can provide the complementary services that are necessary to make this law work? Guidance counselors in the schools. When you read the literature, Madam Speaker, you see in the United States, in Canada, in England, they drill down into the schools to prevent the recruitment of gang members in the schools. It is part of the curriculum, and you have people sitting, and their job is to be sensitive to the intrusions of gangs into the schools. Have they spoken to the Law Association? Yes, they wrote the Law Association, but what were the comments of the Law Association? And how were they integrated into the legislation? So therefore, it is absent that input. So if, the criminal bar, the Commissioner of Prisons, the Commissioner of Prisons has a significant role in this in terms of reducing recidivism and ensuring that the gang members are not put in remand yard and therefore end up being socialized into a life of crime. The magistracy, have they been consulted? The Ministry of Education, anti-gang, there's anti-gang concepts in schools. I spoke about that before. The NGOs. I would have liked to hear the input of the Forensic Science Center, and I'll deal with that a little later. The Ministry of Sport. Madam Speaker, years ago, when Eric Williams, the founder of that party, confronted gang warfare then in the 60s, and we had the Calypso, when the steel band clashed, Mama, if you hear cutlash and thing. What Eric Williams did was a whole-of-government approach. He transformed the war among steel bands into the he created the National Pan Movement. And that national movement had this annual Pan-Trinbago, they had this annual clash. So when you go to a pan yard and they're preparing for the finals, you can almost feel the tension that Eric Williams was able to transform from the streets into culture. He created the youth camps, El Dorado, Presto Presto, and he made sure that the at-risk youth were put there and that they were mentors to change them. He created the Best Village by Joyce Wong Sang. And there was cultural war. So he used culture and sport to deal with the gangs. What we have today is a legislation with unidimensional, lock them up, jail them. We're looking for efficiency to put the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in our prisons. Madam Speaker, have we heard from the DPP? And I have a report here I have some comments from the DPP. He does not support this legislation. I would like to hear what the DP, since he's pivotal to the success of this legislation. But they have failure to effect convictions. No successful prosecution during the 5 years. Laws already exist to deal with issues that are raised in this bill. When we look at the schedule, we see that all the crimes listed, all the crimes can be done. Larceny, significant arrest. All these things are dealt with. So in a sense, this act is duplicitous. When we look at the first schedule, gang-related activity, larceny of a motor vehicle, laws exist to deal with that. Arson, receiving stolen goods, threatening to publish with intent to extort, demanding money with menace, murder, robbery with aggravation. He said that they needed additional legislation. Our view on this side is we need implementation of the existing laws so that we do not have a surfeit of laws in our country. But there are some fundamental constitutional issues with this bill. The right of association. The law body is against the anti-gang legislation, and I refer to a Guardian report, which I will get shortly, which states that they are against this anti-gang legislation. This is the Trinidad Guardian newspaper. It's reference 11, which I will get. I refer to the Gang Prosecutorial Manual. This is by the United States Gang Prosecutorial Manual by the Office of the Justice, the Office of the U.S. Department of Justice. And it says, it is in the United States. They're different to us, but it still reflects that there are some transcendental arguments that could transcend both and affect both areas. It is not against the law to be a gang member in the United States, nor can a law outlawing gang membership by itself withstand a constitutional challenge. So police may not stop gang members against their will to interrogate or photograph them merely for belonging to a gang. The United States Supreme Court has stated that the guarantees of the Fourth Amendment do not allow stopping and demanding identification or information or taking photographs from individuals without any specific basis for believing that they are involved in criminal activity. So in the United States, you have to actually be involved and before you can stop somebody and question and search. It is under this legislation, there are some issues about whether it does not lead to profiling of individuals. Arbitrary detention, another issue. Clause 16 enables a police officer to detain a person who he reasonably suspects of having committed an offense for a period, suspects of having committed an offense for a period not exceeding 72 hours. This detention can be effected without a warrant. Madam Speaker, I go back to the concerns of the Law Association. They said that the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm reading from The Guardian, to 29 June 1916. The Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago is not in support of any extension of the lives of the Bail Amendment Acts and the Anti-Gang Act of 2011, which is now before Parliament. It says, in the discharge of its mandate to protect and assist the public in Trinidad and Tobago in all matters relating to the law, including to promote, maintain, and support the administration of justice and the rule of law, the Law Association has maintained a clear and consistent position on bail and the anti-gang legislation. And they give some reasons. And that is why That is why, and the anti-gang legislation, and that is why they wrote the Law Association, but we have not seen the input, or the Attorney General has not addressed the inputs of the Law Association. Here are the reasons of the Law Association. Since their initial introduction, neither piece of legislation has acted as a deterrent to the commission of serious crime, nor has there been any explanation nor statistics to show that either piece of legislation has in essence reduced crime. Don't tell me statistics about how many gangs there are, and we know how many streets, and we know their names. We want to know how, statistically, how this legislation has reduced crime. Secondly, the Law Association says the pre-trial detention of persons without bail for a period of 120 days is not reasonably justified in a society that has proper respect for the rights and freedoms of the individual. Given the arguable inability of the criminal justice system to process those who are incarcerated under this legislation within a reasonable time. In the association's view, that incarceration...
Madam Speaker, I rise on Standing Order 48-1. This is not relevant to the bill before us.
I'm going to allow you some leeway. Member for Naprima, please continue.
Madam, Madam Speaker.
Just please contain the crosstalk. Continue, please, Member for Naprima.
Madam Speaker, I am speaking about the Law Association and their comments about the anti-gang bill. They said, in fact, the legislation whose life would be extended under the proposed amendments has significantly increased the number of persons on remand. That is applicable to this bill. The conditions on remand where these accused are kept are acknowledged to be deplorable and have been judicially described as barbaric and inhumane. So if you arrest these gang members, you're going to put them, as we speak, in barbaric and inhumane conditions. And that is why I made the point, what is our conceptual and philosophical attitudes to gang members? Do we see them as equal to us and all of us being children of God? Or do we see them as people who are in a Hobbesian sense, who should be punished and put in prison? The significant deficiencies of the forensic system resulting in unreasonable delays in forensic testing means that persons are unlikely to have matters involving the use of firearms heard within a minimum of 2 to 3 years. And then this is a fundamental concern. There are no safeguards against malfeasance by police officers in a situation in which the mere mention by a police complainant of suspicion of being involved in a gang invokes no bail provisions. So we have some concerns. And it is not good enough to come to this parliament and say we wrote them and they have not responded. Your duty is to incorporate, consult, get the best possible advice. So when we come to this house, we have the best possible legislation. And the question is why they have not responded. That is a very good question, because they know they would not be listened to or heard. So there is a fundamental lack of consultation. On June 2016, and we heard it repeated today, the Attorney General, it's in Hansard, 7th of the 1st, 2016. Specifically, I wrote the Leader of the Opposition. I wrote the DPP. I wrote the Chief Justice, the Law Association, the Criminal Bar Association, and the Commissioner of Prisons asking for commentary and cautioning that this bill would be dealt with to seek an extension of time in relation to the suspension. And to date, what is required is not to tell us, Madam Speaker, that you wrote. You have to tell us what happened, what was the consequence, what were the inputs, or if they did not provide information, what was the reason? Maybe they feel that this government would not listen. Our research shows that it's only the opposition leader who responded, and she asked for further information, which has not yet been replied. Madam Speaker, there's a question of profiling, and I alluded to this in the US legislation. But in this parliament, Hansard, Wednesday, December the 1st, when they were in when the PNM was in opposition, Wednesday, December 2010. Wednesday, December the 1st, 2010. And I'm reading here, Miss Marlene McDonald is the honorable member for Port of Spain South. I quote, the legislation is discriminatory. It targets Laventille and targets these areas. It is discrimination, end of quote. So what is the difference today? Is this legislation different? And I talked about the U.S. Department of Justice introducing guidelines for federal officers and said in making routine or spontaneous law enforcement decisions, such as ordinary traffic stops, federal law enforcement officers may not use race, ethnicity, gender, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity to any degree, except that officers may rely on the listed characteristics in specific suspect description. And this prohibition applies even where the use of listed characteristics might otherwise be lawful. But, Madam Speaker, what about the Forensic Science Center? We have the retired, yes, the retired forensic science pathologist, Dr. Valery Alexandrov, stating that since his retirement, nothing has happened. There have been no improvements in the Forensic Science Center, notwithstanding all the talk we get from that side and the obfuscation from that side. He says that, I don't understand the system they have in place at this time. And he talks about one of the pathologists in Tobago, one in Trinidad. And when the one in Trinidad goes on vacation, the one in Tobago will have to pick up this slack. What will happen in Tobago? He talked about going to the forensic science and seeing 900 bodies, Madam Speaker. And this, how do they think that we will come here and pass legislation because they're bullying us when they're the support systems?
Okay, now I want you to bring what you're saying into the bill. I've allowed you a lot of leeway.
Madam Speaker, is it not correct to find out for the legislation to have effect that the support systems must be in place? Because we are asking us to support a bill in the absence of the infrastructure. We talk, and this is what was the point raised by the DPP. The operationalization of this bill. This is critical. This is not relevant. This is not circuitous. This is important. We are told that the remand yard is overwhelmed. Permit me to put on record this fact. In the prisons, and I'm speaking of Hansard, the 1st of December 2016, the Honorable Faris Al-Rawi, he says, permit me to put on record this fact. In the prisons, we have 234 persons in pre-trial detention. And now we are saying that we have 2,400 plus gangs who are targeted by this legislation to further overwhelm our remand yard. But you see, we look on the legislation differently. We look at a holistic all-of-government approach that involves reducing the pipeline towards the creation of gangs, not just locking up gang members. So what do we do? And what do we see? And here's where government, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. MILAT, there was a $4 million decrease, in the budget, MILAT. And I'm reading, Madam Speaker, from the Trinidad Guardian of 2 weeks ago, in which they said December 5th, sorry, it's quite recently. And what this is saying is Monday, 4th December 2017, Madam Speaker. And it says, this was at the funeral of a member of MILAT. And it said the person who was conducting the funeral service, Prophetess Reverend Natasha Leon, has called on the government to implement the youth-oriented, military-led academic training academy program in the nation's prisons as a rehabilitative measure. She continues, this program should be integrated into the prisons. We ought to look at getting into the schools from as early as preschool and take preventative measures rather than finding solutions after the fact, which this legislation attempts to do. So we have people from all ranks.
Honourable Member for Naparima, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes if we both can't stand at the same time. You're entitled to 15 more minutes if you intend to avail yourself.
I'll avail myself, Madam
Proceed.
Speaker. Civilian Conservation Corps, another body that would help in reducing the pipeline of at-risk youth into the gangs. That was cut by $13 million. Mentoring program for youth at risk, nothing allocated in this year's budget. National Youth Service, nothing allocated. Grants for expansion of universal ECC, 2.7 million decrease. Decreases in UTT, 7.5 million. National Training Agency, 1 million decrease. YTEP, 9 million decrease. Costa, 20 million decrease. But yet they could find money, 240 million for the SSA. So they are more interested in spying on, locking up, rather than helping young people. And that's why when I started, I spoke about the spiritual, fundamental philosophical platform from which we operate with respect to this legislation. Madam Speaker, it was Newsday, November the 1st, 2017. There is significant male underperformance in our education system. This is an article by Elizabeth Solomon. If we do not, we could pass legislation here from now till the heavens fall. If we do not deal fundamentally with that problem, then we will just be creating a situation where we lock up more and more of our young males, and in particular our young black males. So what is the international experience, and what can we learn from them? My colleague talked about the Jamaica example. I quote from the Gleaner, Madam Speaker, January 14, 2014. The weakness of the anti-gang legislation law. This is Jamaica by Yvonne McCullough Sobers, guest columnist. She says, like our friends opposite, politicians will shortly pat each other on the back for finally passing anti-gang legislation. They will yet again convince themselves that harsh laws scare criminals, even though crime data suggests otherwise. Madam Speaker, that's the same thing here. The crime data suggests that harsher and harsher laws do not solve our crime problem. You cannot legislate against crime. She says, with anti-gang law in place, policing methods are likely to alienate more youth and more communities. The police will now be able to arrest and charge inner city youth without needed evidence that they committed any crime. The flurry of arrests will no doubt bring about a fall in crime initially that will seem to prove that the new law is having the desired effect, but it will not. So they bring the example of Jamaica, and we have in the Jamaica Gleaner and other newspapers and other papers. It is not working. Crime is rampant in Jamaica, although I saw where there were 130 persons charged since the anti-gang legislation came into place. At least they're working. The police are working, and they're doing things. Same cannot be said about Trinidad. Jamaica, I'm reading. Jamaica anti-gang bill approved by House amid controversy. So it was not plain sailing. They had concerns just as we have concerns. And so long as we are convinced that there are flaws in the legislation, we are not going to support it. We are not going to support it. We are saying fundamentally that this law needs more consultation. We need to hear from the DPP, we need to hear from the Law Association, the Criminal Bar Association, and others who have an impact, so that when we pass legislation, we are sure that we are passing something that is good. We have, Madam Speaker, we have the effectiveness of the St. Lucia anti-gang legislation questioned. So all over the Caribbean, we are not singular in asking the questions we are doing. It is almost everyone. I'll get to Central America very shortly. It says, and this is from the Lucian People's Movement in St. Lucia, and I quote, the message that is emanating from the government of St. Lucia is that they have finally run out of ideas as to how to effectively deal with growing crime in the country. They have opted to enact simple laws from the comfort of Parliament that will no doubt prove difficult to enforce. So all over the world, Madam Speaker, we are hearing concerns
I want to go to El Salvador. El Salvador government recognizes anti-gang law is a bad mistake and plans an alternative. These are the countries that are, in fact, they say San Pedro de Sula is one of the cities with the highest crime rate in the world. And they're saying that the anti-gang law makes it a crime even to belong to a gang, leaving all youth at risk, since a group of minors can be arrested for being together on a corner or for having tattoos. And they go on to say that they are looking at alternatives. This is the government of El Salvador. And there are others. Guatemala is is number 30. Yes. Guatemala is departing. Guatemala departs from draconian regional policy on gangs. And I'm quoting, Guatemala is taking a different tack from its neighbors in the regional effort to control gang violence. Guatemala has witnessed the result of what they call the super mano dura policy that has stuffed the prisons in El Salvador and the anti-gang law in Honduras, and has led to the death by fire for more than 100 imprisoned gang members. And the commissioner of the Presidential Coordinating Commission, he says that, that Guatemala is ready to attack the problem at its social, economic, and educational roots, Madam Speaker. So we are seeing a global concern that this legislation, which initially, and in 2010, we thought that it was the panacea to the gang situation and to reduce crime. We are at this stage looking for the evidence to see that the act worked, and if it worked, what are the utility of this bill, and how it can address our situation with crime. We are not convinced, but we have an alternative crime plan which we will roll out subsequently, Madam Speaker. Our 10-point plan, and I'll just read, stop the pipeline to the prisons, the ECC, which globally recognizes that at-risk youth, the babies, the children, before they get into primary school, they have a chance to compete because they get quality education. And even at that level, this government has even stymied and cut budgetary allocations. The YTC, orphanages, the Children's Act, guidance counselors. So we're stopping the pipeline to the prisons through gangs. That's one. Two, we make our schools' curricula more relevant to the needs of males and more reflective of multiple intelligences. Three, we identify and develop policies for at-risk youth. Four, we minimize income inequalities and reduce poverty. And I must give credit to my political leader. While she was in government, the plethora of grants that were given and cash transfers in order to reduce income inequalities. Incorporate the mosques, churches, and temples in an inclusive strategy for at-risk youth. In our time, we give grants to the churches, and this was to help them financially to carry out their spiritual remit, which would be beneficiary to us as a country, and specifically to our at-risk youth. 6, develop a well-thought-out sport and culture policy, including employment opportunities in these areas. 7, recreate our approach to tertiary education. Recreate our approach to tertiary education that allowed for multiple skills development. I must give credit to my colleague from Chaguanas East, the plethora of programs that he instituted, particularly in the tech VOC areas, to ensure that persons who were not academically gifted were able to survive and have a role and a stake in our society. 8. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. 8, introduce entrepreneurship as part of the tertiary curriculum, especially in the tech VOC areas. You know, in the United States, after the Second World War, and all these soldiers were returning, GIs, the General Infantry, were returning after the war to the United States. And the United States had a challenge. What should we do with these young men? And Theodore Roosevelt, and this is where you talk about leadership with vision, not leadership with a lock-up mentality. Theodore Roosevelt introduced the GI Bill, which gave every GI a quantum of money which he could have used to educate himself. And you know what happened? Most of those fellows from Kansas and the Midwest who were farmers ended up being professors, engineers, and technologists because of that program. So we are saying, there's an alternative, an educational alternative, a positive alternative, which we could look at. But he did more than that. 10% of all state contracts in terms of buildings were reserved for graduates of the educational program consequent upon the GI Bill. Why can't we, if we build this building and the Chinese come from China and they bring their workmen and they bring everything and all the benefits accrue to China, why can't we reserve 10% of these for graduates of the MILAT program or the National Training Agency or the NESC, etc.? It requires brain thinking. But, Madam Speaker, they're opposite. When I read all over the world what they're doing to confront their young people, when I look at what my government is doing, Madam Speaker, I am embarrassed because, seriously, it is not up to the task of the challenges we face in Trinidad and Tobago at this time. It is not. And I can guarantee you, Madam Speaker, if we pass this legislation, the murder rate, so long as they're in power, the murder rate will increase annually, year upon year, because they do not know, even though they talk about a holistic, all-of-government approach to solving crime. And item 9 in our plan will involve a critical review of the prison conditions, especially for under 24 age group, and the removal of criminal records in certain situations. This is standard practice in North America, in certain precise, targeted situations. So a criminal review of the prison. Otherwise, we come here and we pass legislation. We have a pipeline to the prisons. The young boys meet graduates, professionals, PhD in crime in our prisons, and they become socialized to a life of crime. Madam Speaker, and the 10th point is community policing, backed up by more focused intelligence gathering on gangs. I am not convinced, notwithstanding what was said by the member for San Fernando West, that they have the requisite intelligence to deal with the situation and to reduce the situation with crime in our country. So, in summary, what is our position? This is bad legislation. This, which we cannot support in the form presented. It must, repeat, be informed by adequate stakeholder input, specifically the DPP, the Law Association, the Criminal Bar Association, the Prison Service, etc. And we are saying, we will never not be coerced to pass bad legislation. We have the country's interests at heart. Madam Speaker, we are patriots on this side. We are patriots. We do our work. All of us are convinced we have nowhere else to go. I have no links with Ghana. I have not sworn allegiance to another country. I am totally, if Trinidad burned down, all of us on this side standing on the ashes, and we will not tolerate from that side the constant accusation about us being patriots. Madam Speaker, I lived in Canada. I lived in Canada for 10 years, and my accent is Trinidadian. It is not like Lavantil West, and affected something. Personally. It is. That my language is Trinidadian to the core. I serve my constituents, all of us on this side, we serve our constituents. The member for Lavantil West, his constituents say they do not see him. He is not seen. And Madam Speaker, another point. Following the money has not only to do with, and I hope that they equally follow the barrel, the 130,000 that went to FCB. I hope they follow that. It has not been explained fully. And I demand an explanation. And the accent on this side, this Lavantil West, Madam Speaker, Lavantil West, he must do his work, earn his keep. He mustn't be a backbencher in cabinet. I have read A.V. Dicey, I've read Professor Casey Ware, Ivor Jennings, and I've not met the concept of a backbench cabinet member. Madam Speaker, so when we talk white-collar crime, it is not only about following the money, it is about earning the money.
And next time the Prime Minister calls him, I hope he returns his text. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Laventille West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I make a contribution to this debate speaking as Member of Parliament for Laventille West, and proudly so, and as well speaking as one of the 23 persons in the Cabinet of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I speak having consulted with my constituents for this debate, the constituents of Laventille West. I took the trouble to put together a cadre of individuals from my constituency, from all around the constituency, told them about the measures in this bill, and sought their opinions. The member for Naparima, in his very wild contribution, happened to tell us that he was embarrassed. I don't know about what, but it simply reminded me of a woman of the night, a woman of easy virtue attempting to hide her legs. Hypocritical in the extreme.
Don't continue along that line.
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Speaker, he spoke of and mentioned this business of young blacks, a matter that is near and dear to me, and spoke pretentiously as though he was concerned. But that member for Naparima, in response, Madam Speaker, found himself as one of 3 UN ambassadors having lunch with Marine Le Pen of the National Front Fascist Party of France some time ago. When the French ambassador to the UN scorned that meeting, said she was not welcomed, the representative for the United Nations from Trinidad, the member for Naparima, had lunch with her, and then coming to tell us about young blacks in Trinidad. They are hypocrites. They are hypocrites. And unpatriotic wickedness is all we get from them. He correctly told us that they had fundamental differences from the PNM, and I agreed with that. I applauded him, because we love Trinidad and Tobago. We built Trinidad and Tobago. We have not raped it. We are not possessed of criminogenic tendencies. We uphold the principle of morality in public affairs, and therefore, they are fundamentally different from us on this side. Fundamentally different. He told us hypocritically, Madam Speaker, that they are not about locking up people. I remember John Sandy speaking for the UNC in this house as a former Minister of National Security, telling us that we need to love them, embrace them, hug them. And shortly after that, the UNC put in place a state of emergency and locked up hundreds, if not thousands, of people and charged 463 people under the anti-crime and had to release 213 in days. Others are going through the courts now, as the Attorney General told us, with great difficulty. Hypocritical in the extreme. He tried to tell this country that the bill that we present today, which the Attorney General explained is the same at its core, with a few amendments in order to meet their taste, their concerns, because prior to today, the leader of the UNC, the leader of the opposition, told the country in an interview what their concerns were, and not for the first time. So we took the opportunity, we sat in Joint Select Committee with them on this matter before, and we took the opportunity to address their concerns in these amendments. So they are totally familiar with them. And to come to tell us that the bill is very different today because theirs had a sunset clause, meaning it would have expired at the end of 5 years, is hypocritical and empty. And this one doesn't have a sunset clause because we have learned since 2011 of the need and the importance of this, the situation that the citizens of this country have to deal with on a daily basis, the impact of this had we not flawed it and wasted it on that occasion. And now we know it is good for Trinidad and Tobago. It is now no longer new law as it was in 2011, and therefore we do not propose a sunset clause. It's as simple as that. Madam Speaker, I speak to you today, or the people of Trinidad and Tobago, in the context of wanton murders around the place, bloodshed, mayhem, where citizens are living in fear. That's a fact. You could live in a place where you feel fear, but you are safe. You could be unsafe and feeling safe. But in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a blend of the two. The UNC is clearly not serious about dealing with this because they are seeing this thing politically. They feel that crime will become a political problem for the PNM, and they are not prepared to support in those circumstances. And they are not serious. The fact that they put in the member for Naparima to respond to the Attorney General, and the fact that you heard what you did for the last 45 minutes is evidence, no more you need, that they were not serious about this debate. When you look, the public may not see, but I must now tell them, when you look at the benches across the floor, they are half empty. The member for Siparia is not here. She's somewhere in the Bahamas, along with, I suspect, the member for Orapuch East, receiving the most congenial award from some organization. The member for Chaguanas West is not here. But not here. I have seen in this world where the British
Speaker,
Prime Minister...
48-1, where are we going with this? Who's here and who's not here?
I am aware.
Please continue, member for Laventille.
The member for Caronese is not here as I speak. I have seen British prime ministers leave wherever they were in the world, the US presidents, and fly back home in a haste to deal with important matters of national affairs. Right. So I must ask, where are they? Orapuch West is in Miami as well. On this critical matter, in circumstances where murder and crime running rampant, as they know. And last week, in the mutual assistance debate, the same thing happened. The same thing happened. They will tell us about Joint Select Committee. As the Attorney General told us, a Joint Select Committee is a subset of the Parliament, a few of us representing the whole. We are all here, and we are willing to discuss this critical, urgent, and important matter in the full glare of the public for all Trinidad and Tobago to see and to hear the logic and the need and the empty resistance from the other side. And they saw it well in the presentation of the member for Naparima. We're here to do it line by line. No delaying tactics. No more delay. Let's get on with it. We need it now. We need it now. And as for my accent, I am a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And all I try to do is to speak properly when I have to. And speak, more importantly, to speak truthfully. And this debate is about right and wrong, good and evil, righteousness as opposed to wrongiousness. Permit me a colloquialism now. Where do you stand in this struggle in Trinidad and Tobago today? Where do we stand as a parliament in Trinidad and Tobago today? The taxpayers pay us and voted for us to come here to represent their interests. And one of the first duties is to provide them with public safety. And the member for Naparima, like all of his colleagues, will get up and ask us, what are we doing about public safety? We are doing today's debate. We came here with legislation today to make the platform, the tools, the instruments that the police must use sharper and better for them. Very, very quickly, I am aware that we had the Muslim element coming to Trinidad and Tobago in the late 80s, at least long before that, but I'm talking about certain elements coming in the late 80s. It culminated with some activity in 1990 that we will never forget. Radicalism. And then there were some brothers. I mean, I wasn't in Trinidad at the time, but I understand that they were going around seizing drugs and guns and dominating blocks. And there were some brothers in the Laventille area who decided we are not tolerating that. We are standing up to them. And I am told by the people of Laventille and otherwise that that gave birth to this issue of Muslim and Rasta City. Rasta City coined later on to bring about so-called peace. But I told them at that time, because I was in national security at the time, after, talking about 2005 or so, when I told them that you will have no peace once the weapons of war are in the midst. And I called on them to hand over their guns in the spirit of peace. And that was not really altogether done. Some people responded and others not. And the situation has mushroomed since that time. In 2010, we had a spate of murders as we are having now. I remember one weekend we lost 11 citizens, and there were 6 in Arima, and that prompted the government to institute the infamous state of emergency. It was, they had come to Parliament before, as the AG explained, with the anti-gang legislation. We expressed our views, but we understood the circumstances at the time, and we provided support for it. It was draconian, some people say. It required a special majority. We provided it. And so, shortly after, when they declared the state of emergency, they went in there using that anti-gang legislation, picked up people through the police service, who the police knew in their own minds and from their records were involved in criminal gang activity. But they went on the basis of this brand new legislation and picked up people. Nothing was wrong with the law. Correct. It was the operations were not properly planned. They went half-cocked. They went unprepared. And as Mr. Barrow later explained, you know, there's a difference between ordinary crime and gangland crime, something I'll come to in a little while. And they did not take the time to procure the evidence, the quality of the evidence that was necessary to convict persons in the gang context as gang members, gang leaders, and gang activity. And that was all. But, Madam Speaker, the problems of gangs in reality existed. In fact, the statistics now show that it has doubled. And more than doubled in terms of members. So the problem existed back in 2011. It subsisted all the way through to today. It still exists. It has gotten worse. And therefore, when the time came when the sunset fell upon it, we came back to the Parliament to say to the Parliament, we need your support to continue because the problem continued. And the UNC, for all kinds of reasons, all of which we have attempted to address before coming here, today, they refuse to give it support. All the issues they raised about statistics and information from the Commission and all that, we provided all of it. But you see, the UNC believes that crime is a PNM problem and not a national problem. And that's why we describe them as unpatriotic without apology. So the charges failed. And the psyche of the police, the psyche of the national community, the psyche of the Parliament suffered a big blow because the conjoint effect of that state attempt to deal with gangland activity was thwarted. We racked up, in other words, a failure. Because people did not take time to build up justiciable evidence. So the gangs are still there, bigger and getting worse. The extortion, the murders, the kidnapping, the illegal quarrying, which is a major issue because that involves a lot of gang activity too. The police reported to us recently that in one quarry where illegal quarrying is taking place, men are now guarding it with assault weapons and shooting at each other. Organized crime around it. And therefore, this business of illegal quarrying is a matter we are dealing with, but we are also dealing with giving the police the power to deal with gang activity, a matter to which I shall shortly return again. But in 2016, the opposition rejected us. There are 2 main factions, as we have seen from the police reports. We are not police officers. I used to be. But now I'm a parliamentarian and a minister of government. I'm a public servant. And the 2 main gangs are the Rasta City and the Muslims, so-called. And there are neutral gangs and there are other gangs. In my constituency, and I promise to speak as MP, there are 41 gangs. And all I see, I don't see gangs because I represent all. I don't see gangs. I see ordinary, poor, disaffected youth, misguided, being misled, being used by those who are more mature than them and those who set themselves up as being big and powerful in the communities. And this legislation will give the police an opportunity to deal with that. And in many cases, Madam Speaker, most of them, unlike me, are not no genuine Rasta. They don't understand the philosophy. They don't understand the root. They don't. But it is a name. It is a name. And so too many of the so-called Muslims. Some might be true to the Shahada and their oath and the way of their life, but a lot of them are just using the name. And from the information we have from the police, they're very footloose. We have seen gangs that were Muslim convert to Rasta City and vice versa. It's happening. All of the area of Laventille and many parts of the country, unbeknown to many other citizens, are now marked out in areas. Yesterday, a constituent called me and she had a problem and I told her to come up to the office to see me. She said, Mr. Hinds, I can't come there. My office is in St. Babs. I said, why? She said, I don't want to be no message. She don't, oh, I said, but you are not in gang. But she said, I could be a message. They could use me to send a message. And she then told me that the area is area coded. And it is true. But for those who are not involved in that, particularly mature citizens, and certainly our friends on the other side, they wouldn't have a clue what is going on around us. But the police knows. The police understand. And we take our timing from their reports. And they have asked us for this legislation, and we are here today to make it possible that they would have it. The teachers in my community are telling me the Prime Minister established recently a special education program for Laventille, recognizing, as my friend is pretending belatedly to urge. A long time ago, we understand that as soon as we went to government, we rearranged the school curriculum. We published the history of Trinidad and Tobago to put into the curriculum, and a special education program for Laventille, including Laventille Mova. And the teachers are telling me that the children in primary schools have begun to manifest this division of Muslim and Rasta City. They're not speaking to each other. And if they speak in school, when school over, the division starts. A 13-year-old, and I have a letter here that she wrote to me for the Honorable Prime Minister, explained to me last week that she was slapped up by others because she from an area that is supposed to be Rasta. And she at age 13 must carry the burden of where she must pass to go to school. She told me she saw 2 shootings already at age 13. So if they pretend it's a matter for them, this gang thing is real. We read last week about the police having for the second time with soldiers to extricate, if I may say so, to evict people from the Clifton Hill Towers, which this government built, improving the condition in East Port of Spain. Got a footprint and put beautiful buildings there. Twice they had to evict illegal occupants. And I read in the daily newspaper, not from me, not from the police, citizens in there saying that the gangs are growing and intimidating them and challenging them. Gangs. So if they don't know what a gang is, if they don't know what gang membership is, if they don't know who gang leader is, if they don't know what gang activity is, the people of Trinidad and Tobago on the ground who are suffering and bleeding and crying, they know what it is. And it is to them we speak today. And let me say, I'm reading a report that I received from the police service, and it really analyzes the whole business of gang legislation. And there's a little quotation that I want to run here for the benefit of my friends on the other side. The legislation, and I'm quoting, this is the police, the legislation was to some extent feared by members of criminal gangs and provided some limited deterrent on their activities. When arrested, and this is the poignant part, when arrested, gang members went out of their way to identify with crimes that did not fall under the day-to-day activity of gangs. This trend by gang members meant that the legislation was indeed having an impact on their activities, which inadvertently caused them to consider, firstly, their responsive court rather than focus on the success of their criminal pursuits. What this is saying in plain and simple language is that with the gang legislation, because of the stricter sanctions, the periods of detention, and now we put forfeiture of their property, taking the value out of their criminal behavior. And the fact that you could go to court and seek an extension of the order to give the police more time to investigate the gang activity. Because the question has to be asked, you know, if two lawyers, and the gang definition of gang says 2 or more persons to carry out a criminal enterprise, roughly. If 2 lawyers, knowing that a client was dead, continue to represent that client, with a view, no doubt, that when the benefits of his claim came, somehow or the other, someone other than the deceased would benefit. Yeah. You might consider that that is gangland behavior. And the question, therefore, is, what would cause the police not to charge if criminal matters flowed under the anti-gang? In other words, there's a difference between ordinary possession of firearm and robbery and so on, as opposed to gang. And you know what the difference is, Madam Speaker? The gang business is more complex. You just don't prove that the thing is a firearm, or that they committed a robbery, or that they came together as a group, 2 or more, to rape or to money launder or to extort money from business people. No, or to do illegal quarrying. It requires to show the complexity of the relationship between them. That takes a longer time. That takes more time. It takes more painstaking investigation, because you have to show that they were in communication with each other for a period of time to demonstrate gang activity. And that is what was missing in 2011, you know. The police knew all of the gang members. They knew they had guns and drugs and selling and doing all of that. But what they did not have at the time was this complex network of showing the interconnectivity between the individuals and the activity. And that is what this is all about. And the AG read from the Jamaican legislation and the comments of Mr. Bunton in Jamaica to make the point that you can leave it as it is and pursue individual or standalone crimes, as we have it in the schedule of this bill. But gang activity is real. Organized crime is real. It has greater effect. I read an IMF report recently dealing with the Jamaican economy, which said in essence that for 4 decades and more, the Jamaican economy was thwarted, was sick, was blighted because of extortion and criminal and gang activity taking place so rampant in Jamaica. And if there was one reason why I will support this on behalf of the people of Laventille West, it's because especially in these troubled economic times, I don't want that to happen to Trinidad and Tobago. If there was one reason, that was it. Because the evidence from the world economists show that that kind of activity can have a very, very nasty impact on the entire economy. It chases away business people. Some time ago on the Beatum, a businessman carrying out a government contract, we got them there to remove the drains that took murky water off the Beatum. They collapsed. We put contractors on the job. The next thing you know, they're demanding 400,000 fired shots, and injured a worker from the government, from their contractor's staff. It's real. So when we come here today, it's not no play and not no time wasting. So there are gangs, there are gang members. People are living in fear of crime. Some of the people we see protesting, I can tell you as a representative for Laventille West, some of the people we see protesting, even in the Beatum protest, do it not because they want to, but because they have to. If they don't do it, they'll be branded by others as, well, not only informers, but they'll be branded as, what's the word they use? Traitors. Yeah, well, traitors, yes. Gone against. That is the word in there. Gone against. And they come out. I went to another scene of a protest, and while it was raging, a young man came to me and whispered something, and this is how the police tells us. This is how it works. Not everybody you see doing it want to do it. And if you think it bad in Trinidad, it was worse in countries like Colombia. The thing got so bad, judges, courts, everything in trouble. One gang leader, drug ring, built his own prison, a fella called Escobar. Insisted in El Salvador and other countries. He insisted, you can't put me in your jail. And the state was weak enough and gave way, built his own jail, and then later on a minister of government going there to keep an appointment with him in his building in their jail was killed inside of that place. That is how serious this thing is. This is not a joke. When I tell you, Madam Speaker, that the children 9 years old, 8 years old, beginning to manifest elements of this gang culture, it's serious. This is no play. No place for pretension. And these fellas who walk around with all the gold and so on, they don't see the member for Naparima. He lives next to the cemetery where he grew up as usual. That is the information I have. Forget that, that is minor matter. Yes. So,
continue, Member for Laventille.
Thank you very much. They follow these guys. And these guys become role models for some of them. Bad examples as some of them might be. There are wannabes who want to take their position. I saw a video last night where a 5-year-old boy hanging on, turning around behind the man in whose company he was. And it is only when the man turned around I realized it was an MP5 hanging on his shoulder. And the child curious about it. That video was taken in 2011 from what I understand. Today that child is probably about 11 years of age, 12 years of age. And God knows how he might fare. We have to act. We can't be guilty of the offense of omission. We have to do our part as a parliament. And we are giving you an opportunity to do your part. And today we want to hear clear, precise, concise reasons as to why you're not supporting this. I don't want to hear nothing about how the court ain't working right. We're dealing with that. I want you to tell us why the police should not get the power to deal with gangs. And gangland activity, which is tormenting and torturing the people of this country, causing them to live in fear. That's what I want to hear from you. And some little things they lure them with, you know. They go to a party and then just buy a drink of Hennessy, they buy the big one. And all these things. And if my friends on the other side believe wrongly that they will send their children to fancy schools and they will live in gated communities, I want them to know Robocop was found in one Woodbrook place. And during the state of emergency, others were found in the Hyatt, where they go. And I can tell you from my knowledge, some of these persons fight hard to get their children in the best schools next to yours. Because they can afford to pay the best fees. So you're not hiding. It is real. And that's why you're going to run to the rocks, but the rocks will be melting. You're going to run to the sea, but the sea will be boiling, all because of your wickedness and selfishness and political emptiness. I'm so sorry, but we must speak the truth. I know sometimes it might be a little strident, but the truth. Yes. We have to do the business. The police had proposed for this legislation, which I'm attracted to, the whole issue of a gang expert. And I'm saying so because you have firearms experts, you have forensic experts, you have people who give expert evidence in the court. Because of the complexity of the business called gang, sometimes it might be necessary to satisfy the likes of Mr. Justice of Appeal Bureau that the evidence is met. The police proposed, and I hope one day it will find favor with all of us in this parliament, that you have gang experts, because they're dealing with it on a daily basis, the Organized Crime and Intelligence Unit, as they are now formed into one. And they know what the characteristics, what the features, what the behaviors, the language. I told you area coded just now. You and I wouldn't know what that means. There are 100 different names for drugs and for guns. For example, when they talk about corn, you may think it's ordinary maize or corn that we eat. That is bullet. So that the gang expert will know the language. So if people are listening, if people are observing, then they'll be able to tell the court, these are gangsters talking to each other over a period of time.
Expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes. Might I just seek the concurrence of the House for the member to continue? It'll take us to about 2 minutes after 1.
And we have gangs in Laventil, yes, but we have them in Enterprise, we have them in Siparia, from the police statistics quoted by the Attorney General. We have them in Siparia, we have them in Faizabad, we have them in Cedras, we have them in Mon Diablo, we have them in Tobago, we have them in Marabella train line, we have them in Penal, we have them in Couva. They are all over the place. And it is the police who shared this with us. Tobago alone has 24 gangs, 190 members based on police statistics. One gang collapsed the other day because the boats that they were using to run the activity were lost to them. The true owners of the boats took them back. And I make that point because inside of this bill, which I hope I get 2 minutes to come to, there's a forfeiture provision where the property, you see, if we were dealing with ordinary robbery and ordinary crime simpliciter and not the gang legislation, which provides for forfeiture, then we won't be able to touch their property. And the example I just gave you from Tobago, I'm making the point that if you take their assets away, as this bill proposes, that could be used because that gang actually dismantled after that. They don't exist anymore as a consequence, based on the police information we have. So let me run very quickly. And just before I do that, a lot of them and a lot of people commented on the protests in Laventil, and suddenly it moved from protests and criminal action, running onto the highway, pelting cars, stopping people, frightening Nikki Crosby and others, all together bad behavior, and asking where I was. My job as Member of Parliament is to ensure that every single benefit that this state has on offer for all the people of Trinidad and Tobago comes to Laventil West. That's my job as a representative and other things. But if you are misconducting yourself, I can represent that. I am present, and I am working. Yeah, well, they say. I tell you. So I just want to say, and I don't have the time to go through all of it, but within the last 7 to 10 years, millions of dollars have been spent on major projects here on the Betham. I can tell you that. On the Betham, we have brand new community center. We have a police youth club building there, police presence, the IATF Hearts and Minds. We have the technology center across the road. The priority bus route passes straight through there. $5 or $7, you could go east and west. We have a brand new Excel primary school built a few years ago, I think 2008 or so, inside of the Betham. We just put a whole park, the East Port of Spain development, basketball court, playground, pavilion. And the people of Laventil West want me to say to this country, they refuse and reject the label of depressed. They say they are not a depressed community and will be insulted if you call them that. They lack for nothing. They have internet connection, they have clean running water, they have electricity, they have access to schools. Laventil have 4 secondary schools, 21 primary schools in the Prime Minister's program. Health centers across the place. The Minister of Health told us the best working health center he found since he's minister is on George Street in Port of Spain. NGOs from Republic Bank to the FCB to Serve All. We have Life Center, Serve All right in the middle there on the Betham. They lack for nothing. And we mustn't distinguish criminality from depress or deprivation.
They need to have the gangs moved. That's what this law is for.
And where you have gangs and people are being cursed to be part of it. That's why Clause 8 of this bill deals with retaliatory action. Only recently in my own constituency it came to me and that it brought a tear to my eye. A young man got a job And because the next gang found that he had no right to be working for them people, Muslim, so to speak, the next thing you know, they set upon him mayhem and trouble. And when that happened, there was retaliatory action. A member of a family got killed too.
That's in the law now.
And we are dealing with that in this law. So just to conclude, we have a list, and I could provide this to the media or anyone in Trinidad and Tobago. A whole lot of programs right on the BSAM alone, not to mention the Greater Laventille. So don't come tell me foolishness about my constituency is depressed. They are not. Some of the better houses I've seen is inside of Laventille. And many of the children of Laventille have gone, by the way, they have access to all the big schools in Port of Spain. Fatima, CIC, QRC, St. Joseph's, Bishop, and they do come there. We want to protect them so that they can have a better life. That's why we put this in place. Right, good. So, Madam Speaker, time is clearly running. We are now crossed 461 or so murders. Robberies, as I was sitting here, I heard about another one. The crime situation is running rampant, and we, on this side, see the measures before us as important in order to deal with that. There is no anti-gang law at the moment. It is the police who are saying that they need it. We have no difficulty with these definitions. Our friends are very familiar with them. They brought it in 2011. We went to Joint Select Committee and trashed it out. The reason why it failed is not because of the law, but because of the failure of law enforcement to have accumulated the evidence that was needed to support the law. We have demonstrated that the intelligence platform has been strengthened. The police, by being able to produce the statistics that we rely on in this debate, is evidence that the intelligence area has also been addressed. And therefore, we need to put this in place in order to make sure that the police have what they need in order to carry out their job. And as for firearms, constituents are coming to me on a daily basis to report that they see big, long weapons all over their communities. They come to me, they just want to get out. One woman came about 2 weeks ago. She saw 3 young men with assault rifles outside of her door. The videos of which the Attorney General spoke are rampant all over the country, not just in Laventille, it's happening. And we have to deal with that. So I understand, through the lips of Minister Young and Minister Dillon, consistently, from the level of national security, attempts are being made to take guns out of the system. And that has to be sustained. That has to continue. So, quite frankly, if the police capture 900 guns in a year, I am not altogether comfortable with that, because I know, I believe, from the reports I have and from what I'm seeing anecdotally sometimes, there are far more than that around the place, causing far more mayhem. And we need to do that. We have 8 gun manufacturers in Brazil, which is next to Guyana, and Guyana next to we. 8. And they produce guns in this world and sell them like biscuits. And a lot end up here. We have to deal with our border issues, but at the same time, we have to empower the police to treat with gangs and their growth in Trinidad and Tobago. So, Madam Speaker, I urge my friends on the other side to understand that the police want this legislation. And this legislation also provides for dealing with police officers, members of the protective services generally, Defense Force, prison, customs, all of them who are defined in this act, and intelligence agency operators too. If you are found to be colluding with gang members, you too will be treated under this legislation and will receive a sanction accordingly. It's all there. The bill is before us. When we get to committee stage, I'll have more time. We could get into the details of it. But it is not strange to my friends because it was there all along. So, Madam Speaker, I think we have said enough. This objection about no statistics, that is not real. We are now producing the statistics from inside the jail and from the police outside. That there was no intelligence, that is not true. They were the ones who mashed up SORT, and SORT dealt with gang and organized crime. We now have an organized crime and intelligence unit, a conglomeration of 2 units, and they are deep into this. And in the course of preparing for this debate, my conversations with these officers satisfied me that they are on top of it. They are the ones who tell us all the things we said here today. They know what is required. They have heard Mr. Justice Barrow. They know the evidence that they must put together, whether it is electronically or otherwise, human or whatever. And once they get that, and the police service roots out the corrupt officers, because I submit without apology that sloth, laziness, low productivity, low energy, and corruption affects the performance of the police service in responding to these issues. And I call on the police service, as I did with the prison service some time ago, notwithstanding some of them anger and upset, to be professional, to be ethical, to be law-abiding. The difference between criminal and police is your training and your oath, and you stand on moral high ground as a police officer, as I was. You can't afford to do otherwise. The world will also be at your door. And so I say in closing to my friends on the other side, I've demonstrated that this gang problem is not just about enterprise. It's not just about the train line. It's not just about Laventille. They have it in Kuva. They have it in Siparia, in Faizabad, all over. And they are at our doors. I hope my friends understand the importance of this and set aside their personal and other concerns and give support to the Parliament on this occasion so that we as a nation, as we did in 2011, could respond to that growing and grown and expanded gang and crime problem. And we could all say, we've done our job. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Members, I propose we take the lunch break now and we return at 2 p.m.